Legend whispers that hidden beneath the Vatican lie beings the world has never seen. Guarded with holy relics and secret manuscripts, their tale remains forever concealed. Rather than being destroyed, these secrets were meticulously concealed behind layers of metal and stone. If unraveling mysteries fascinates you, don't forget to subscribe. We move forward carefully as our story begins to unfold. Deep beneath Vatican City, the air is thick and unmoving, heavy with centuries of silence. Far below the footsteps of tourists and the morning bells of St. Peter's, there lies an ancient route, older than the church itself, even predating Christianity. The stone floor is worn smooth by the feet of those long gone, priests, rulers, and seekers, all united by a single mystery. What is hidden beneath the Vatican's marble floors? The story starts with a key, not a modern one, but a heavy, rusted iron relic, its handle shaped like a bishop's crozier. It was uncovered in 1949. While repairing part of the papal residence, a worker pried away a concealed panel behind a stone arch and found the key, wrapped in waterproof fabric, buried with a fragment of faded parchment. On the parchment, a single Latin phrase was barely legible: Quod clausum est, non aperiatur. What is sealed must not be opened. The worker gave the find to his supervisor, who passed it to a Monsignor. By nightfall the key had vanished and the opening was sealed with fresh mortar. No one offered an explanation, no official record was made, but whispers began to spread, rumours of a sealed gate beneath the apostolic palace, a threshold no living soul had ever crossed. Only weeks later, another strange event took place. A young Swiss guard from Lucerne named Jakob was discovered wandering barefoot in the Vatican gardens at night, muttering in German about a doorway made of bone. That night, Jakob had been assigned to guard a hidden entrance in the archives, a place tourists never see. When questioned, he insisted a figure in a crimson robe had led him down a staircase that shouldn't exist. No records showed anyone in red vestments in that area. The staircase was never found. Jakob was quietly sent home a month later, with no further explanation. Some claim he never spoke again. Stories like these never make it into the Vatican's official history. They are passed quietly, from one elderly priest to another. Legend has it there's a passage beneath the foundations of Peter where the walls drip in summer and freeze in winter, no matter the season. Beyond that, behind a locked gate, lies a chamber untouched for over 6 centuries. It was sealed by a pope whose name has been erased from history. A pope who believed some truths should remain hidden. But we are drawing closer to that secret. Step by step, story by story we approach. The foundations of Vatican City rest on something far older than the city itself. Beneath the splendour of St. Peter's Basilica is a hidden world, a city beneath the city, carved from stone and darkness long before the dome rose above Rome. Roman tombs and pagan temples were buried deep, like seeds forgotten in the earth. They remained silent and undisturbed, revealing nothing. In 1940, during World War II, the Vatican began excavations beneath the Basilica. Officially, the work was to reinforce the crypts. Unofficially, Pope Pius XI ordered it after receiving a mysterious letter. The letter, written in a child's hand and unsigned, simply read, "You are walking on the bones of the fishermen." Some dismissed it as a prank, but others took it seriously. The fishermen clearly referred to Peter, the apostle believed to have been crucified upside down in Nero's circus and buried in secret. If true, the implications were enormous. The Vatican began to investigate. What they found beneath the Basilica was not a single grave, but many. A tangled network of mausoleums, murals, inscriptions, and symbols, all hidden under centuries of Christian stone. Pagan names appeared beside Christian ones. Some tombs were untouched, others had been disturbed long ago. Eventually, they uncovered a particular chamber, deep and narrow, hidden behind a collapsed wall. Inside was a small box containing bones and glass, wrapped in purple linen. The cloth bore Greek letters spelling Petros Eni. Peter is inside, but there was no plaque, no official record, no proof. Only silence and the echo of footsteps on stone. One worker, a young seminarian named Luca, noticed something odd. Below the box, a series of marks on the wall, tiny grooves, as if scratched by fingernails. At first no one cared, but Luca kept returning. Night after night, he copied the marks by candlelight. After weeks of study, he realized they formed a pattern, a code, not random scratches. An ancient code. When he tried to share his findings, he was told to stop. A week later, Luca left Rome. Some say he joined a monastery in the north and never spoke of it again. Others think he was forced into silence. In 1968, the Vatican officially declared the bones belonged to Peter. But the box, the linen, and the mysterious marks were never mentioned in public, remaining hidden in the Vatican's oldest secret. Even now, beneath the marble, the walls remember. The steps leading deeper into the Vatican grottos grow colder with each descent, as if time itself is unravelling. Faint echoes follow every step, bouncing between ancient stone and faded frescoes. Even further down, beneath the papal crypts, lies a place known to only a few, a section of the original necropolis, older than the church by centuries. Here, Emperor Constantine made a pivotal choice. In the early 4th century, as the first Christian emperor, Constantine wanted to build a grand basilica over Peter's tomb. But the challenge wasn't religious, it was practical. The land was a Roman cemetery filled with ornate pagan tombs and family mausoleums. Building the church meant disturbing the dead, something no Roman emperor had dared before. His advisors warned him, his architects hesitated. Disturbing the tombs of Roman nobles risked angering powerful families. Still, Constantine pressed on, quietly. He ordered the necropolis to be covered, not destroyed. The lower levels were filled with earth and stone, sealing generations of Roman dead beneath the new Christian sanctuary. He told no one. For centuries, this was forgotten, until 1955. That year, an Italian scholar named Maria Fedeli found a strange report hidden in the Vatican library. The folder was unmarked. Inside were sketches of burial chambers, notes in Latin and Greek, and a single unsigned letter. He knew what was buried, and built the church not for honour, but out of fear. Maria believed the letter referred to Constantine. She became obsessed with finding the first section of the necropolis that had been sealed. She thought Constantine had discovered something unsettling, something that made him rush the basilica's construction. When she asked to excavate a restricted area of the grottos, her request was denied. Twice. A year later, Maria vanished. No one knows if she fled, was silenced, or simply left. But her notes survived, including a strange sketch. A tomb marked not in Latin, but with symbols no scholar could identify. Circles, intersecting triangles, and a sun without rays. Some think it was a mistake. Others believe it points to something far older than Rome, something Constantine himself may have seen and feared. Today, tourists walk above this forgotten layer, snapping photos and admiring the basilica, unaware of what lies below. But beneath the Vatican, beneath saints and martyrs, the ancient stones remain, silent, waiting, watching. The stones supporting the Vatican. Not long after, something unusual occurred. During that year's Christmas Eve Mass, as the Pope knelt before the altar in St. Peter's Basilica, a strange sound echoed from beneath the floor, a deep groan, as if something ancient was stirring below. The guards dismissed it as the pipes, while others murmured that the throne itself had shifted. Some speculate that a hidden staircase was designed to link the visible church to something far older and deeper, a secret chamber, or perhaps a crypt of mysteries the church was never meant to disturb. Yet someone did open it, and now perhaps something is listening, The Swiss Guard, famous for their vibrant uniforms, tall halberds, and stoic presence, are more than ceremonial protectors. Beneath their striking appearance and silent discipline lies a reality far stranger than most visitors realize. These men are not only bodyguards, they are sentinels, sworn to defend more than just the living pontiff. Every new guard takes an oath, pledging loyalty, secrecy, and constant vigilance. But, as recounted by a former guard from the early 1990s, there is an unspoken part of this oath, a secret duty passed down in hushed tones behind closed doors. This guard, Matthias Keller, served for 3 years before suddenly resigning, citing a family emergency, and never returned to Rome. Years later, after his death, a letter surfaced in which Matthias described a chilling experience during a late-night patrol near the south wing of the Apostolic Palace. It was just past 2 in the morning when he heard a faint metallic click from beneath the marble floor. The hallway should have been deserted, but the noise persisted. As he drew closer, Matthias noticed a wall panel slightly ajar, revealing a narrow gap behind it. Driven by curiosity, he stepped inside. The hidden space was shrouded in darkness, but it was not empty. An elderly man, dressed simply, sat writing in a book with a long quill. The man looked up, surprised, and then smiled. "You're early," he said. Matthias apologized and tried to leave, but the old man motioned for him to stay. "Don't forget this place," he warned. "It moves." The following day, when Matthias returned to the corridor with another guard, the panel was sealed tight. There was no sign of the passage, no opening, no person, only a solid wall and complete silence. Later, Matthias discovered that other guards before him had reported similar encounters, spaces that appeared for a single night, mysterious figures in white robes, books that seemed to refill themselves. One account even told of a sentinel from the late 1800s who vanished without a trace while on duty near the papal archives, leaving behind only his regulation weapon. Leaning against the wall, Matthias revealed that within the Swiss Guard there was a clandestine group, not military, but mystical. In every generation, a select few are chosen to guard the unseen, sealed thresholds, sounds that echo only during prayer, and sacred relics so dangerous that even high-ranking clergy are forbidden to approach. No one has ever confirmed his story. The Vatican has never commented. But one detail remains striking. The year Matthias disappeared, a new recruit joined the Swiss Guard. His name was Elias Keller, Matthias's youngest son. Some say Elias was simply following family tradition. Others believe he was sent to uncover what his father never could. And so, as night falls over the shadowy corridors of the Apostolic Palace, the guards continue their silent vigil. But not all the sentinels are among the living. Deep within the Vatican, beyond 3 locked doors, lies a chamber seen by only a handful of people. It is not part of any tour. No photos exist. No records appear in the public archives. Yet the chamber is real, and those who once guarded it called it the Chamber of the Golden Key. One such guardian was Father Angelo Barzetti, a Vatican locksmith who served under 5 popes. He spent most of his life in darkness, maintaining ancient locks and mechanisms scattered throughout the palace. Before his death in 2004, he gave a confidential interview to journalist Luca Farnese. His words were both vital and strange. "There are 3 keys," Angelo whispered, "but only one is golden." According to him, deep within the Vatican Library there is a room protected by 3 unique locks. Each requires a different key, 1 silver, 1 iron, and 1 gold. The silver key is held by the Cardinal Archivist. The iron key is in the hands of the Swiss Guard commander. The golden key, Angelo claimed, is hidden in the Pope's private study, inside a container that opens only with a Latin invocation. At first, Luca smiled, but Angelo's expression turned grave. "That chamber," he insisted, "holds the Church's memories, the stories we recall only when we wish to forget." No one knows exactly what lies inside, but ancient accounts mention a scroll written in a language older than Latin, a map with no coordinates, and a crown that no pope has dared to wear. One tale even describes a mirror, not of glass, but of polished black stone, which shows not your reflection, but your destiny. After Angelo's death, Luca tried to verify the story. He submitted request after request to access the lower levels of the Apostolic Archive, but was denied each time. Finally, frustrated, he returned to the spot Angelo had described, beneath the fourth row of marble columns in the Hall of Saints. And there, beyond, nel 1961, la chiave scomparve. Sparì durante un periodo di confusione, mentre il Vaticano si preparava per il Concilio Vaticano II. I documenti venivano spostati, vecchie stanze venivano aperte. Una mattina la chiave semplicemente non c'era più. Alcuni credevano che fosse stata rubata, altri dicevano che fosse tornata al luogo in cui era stata creata, nascosta intenzionalmente. Ma poi accadde qualcosa di strano. Un giovane seminarista di nome Luca Moretti, che lavorava negli archivi, scoprì un disegno su un rotolo polveroso. Mostrava la chiave d'oro circondata da 3 cerchi. I cerchi non erano etichettati con numeri, ma con le parole fede, tempo e carne. Luca divenne ossessionato dalla ricerca delle serrature. Trascorse anni a cercare nei passaggi antichi, seguendo voci, decifrando note lasciate da monaci morti da tempo. Nel 1974 scomparve. La sua ultima lettera, scritta a un amico nella curia romana, diceva semplicemente: «Ne ho aperta una. Ancora oggi nessuno sa veramente cosa apra la chiave d'oro. Alcuni credono che apra una cripta sotterranea nel Vaticano contenente scritti perduti degli Apostoli. Altri pensano che conduca a una stanza dove è custodito qualcosa di impossibile, qualcosa di inaccessibile agli occhi umani. E così la chiave d'oro rimane un mistero, un simbolo dei segreti che il Vaticano ha custodito non solo in pietra e metallo, ma nel tempo stesso, nascosto in bella vista, in attesa di essere rivelato. Nell'angolo più remoto del Vaticano, oltre i musei vaticani e oltre le siepi curate dei giardini vaticani, c'è un sentiero che pochi hanno notato. È fiancheggiato da edera e ombra, inghiottito da alberi piantati secoli fa. I locali lo chiamano il sentiero scomparso. La maggior parte dei visitatori presume che i giardini siano attentamente disposti, con ogni fiore e pietra ben definiti. Ma c'è un piccolo arco nel muro occidentale, coperto di vegetazione e mezzo nascosto da una statua rovinata di San Benedetto. Attraversandolo ti trovi su un antico sentiero di ciottoli, morbido di muschio e ombreggiato da cipressi. Secondo la leggenda, questo sentiero fu percorso per la prima volta da Papa Leone XI nell'anno 1515, seguendo un corvo che apparve alla sua finestra e si rifiutò di andarsene. Ogni mattina, per 7 giorni, il corvo tornava. La 7ª mattina il Papa aprì la finestra e lo seguì. Il corvo lo condusse all'arco e lui seguì il sentiero da solo. Quando tornò, la sua veste era coperta di polvere e parlò di una cappella che nessun altro aveva mai visto. Affermò che era più antica della città di Roma stessa e che una voce all'interno aveva parlato non alle sue orecchie, ma al suo cuore. Il giorno successivo sigillò l'ingresso e non disse più nulla. Per oltre 400 anni nessuno ci pensò più. I giardini vaticani furono potati, i sentieri curati, ma nessuno trovò più l'arco fino al 1999. Un giardiniere di nome Enzo stava curando il boschetto inferiore quando scoprì uno strano cerchio di terra appiattita dove l'erba si rifiutava di crescere. Incuriosito, seguì il sentiero e si imbatté nell'arco coperto di vegetazione. Quando guardò attraverso, il sole si oscurò per un momento, sfarfallò e il mondo dall'altra parte sembrava un po' più vecchio. Entrò, seguì il sentiero e tornò un'ora dopo. Ma quando guardò l'orologio erano passati solo 4 minuti. Enzo non parlò mai pubblicamente di ciò che vide, ma il giorno dopo lasciò il suo lavoro al Vaticano e si trasferì sulle colline dell'Umbria. Visse da solo e non tornò mai più a Roma. La Chiesa non ha mai confermato l'esistenza del sentiero, ma i registri dell'Ufficio dei Giardini Vaticani mostrano che la sezione 7WV è stata rimossa da tutte le mappe dopo l'anno 2000. Alcuni credono che il sentiero conduca a una cappella antica costruita prima del cristianesimo stesso. Altri dicono che sia un luogo dove il tempo scorre in modi strani, dove i papi vanno a fare domande che non osano pronunciare ad alta voce. Ma se mai ti trovi a passeggiare per i giardini e senti l'aria improvvisamente fermarsi, ascolta attentamente. Gli alberi potrebbero sussurrare, le pietre sotto i tuoi piedi potrebbero muoversi, e se trovi una porta sotto l'edera e l'ombra potresti già camminare su un sentiero che non doveva mai essere trovato. Un sentiero che scompare dietro di te nel momento in cui fai il primo passo. A Roma circolano sussurri che non parlano di potere o ricchezza, ma di voci, non quelle forti, ma quelle udite in segreto, dietro porte chiuse e nei profondi corridoi di marmo. Questa corrente silenziosa di comunicazione è conosciuta tra alcuni insider del Vaticano come la rete dei sussurri dei cardinali. Tutto iniziò, o almeno venne alla luce, durante il pontificato di Papa Pio IX nel 1860. Quell'anno un giovane archivista di nome Marco Celini scoprì un fascio di lettere nascoste nella spina cava di un vecchio libro negli archivi apostolici. Le lettere erano anonime, scritte con una calligrafia delicata e non avevano nomi, solo titoli. La voce, lo specchio, la fiamma nera discutevano di argomenti non contenuti in alcun decreto ecclesiastico, avvistamenti di strane luci sopra il lago di Nemi, un monaco che invecchiava al contrario dopo un pellegrinaggio, e qualcosa chiamato il segno della 13ª campana. All'inizio Marco credeva che queste lettere fossero false, ma dopo averle mostrate al suo superiore, padre Ernesto Pugliese, tutto cambiò. La risposta fu gelida e immediata. Le lettere furono strappate via, Marco fu trasferito. Dopo poche settimane si trovò in un monastero sperduto nelle Alpi, lontano dalle mura del Vaticano, eppure quelle lettere erano solo Renzo immediately identified an item. It was a dagger, wrapped in linen, with a handle shaped like a holy cross. He had seen it before, sketched in a medieval manuscript titled Confessio Lateranensis, the Lateran Confession, believed to be a record of papal sins whispered before death. What unsettled Renzo the most were not the relics, but the diary next to the dagger. The leather cover was worn, and the pages were stiff with age. Inside, written in small Latin script, were notes from various popes over the centuries. Each described strange visions, ghostly visitors, and inexplicable signs that appeared during times of crisis. The last entry was unsigned but dated 1962, the start of the Second Vatican Council. And then tucked into the back cover was a small piece of paper. It wasn't old, it had been placed there recently. In fresh ink, it read, "Do not let him return with it." Renzo never spoke of what he saw in the Chamber of Silence. But, a few months later, he left the Vatican and vanished from public life. The key was returned, but no one knows if the diary was. Somewhere, beyond the noise of the fountains and the scent of lemons, in the heart of the Vatican gardens, there is a path that does not always appear. The gardeners speak of it in hushed tones. Usually in winter, when the air becomes thin and the hedges seem to whisper, they call it the vanishing path. It never starts the same way. Sometimes it curves behind the ancient olive grove near the Lord's grotto. Other times it seems to emerge from the grass behind the small Marian shrine hidden under the ivy, but it always leads to the same place, a moss-covered stone arch older than the gardens themselves. In 1957, a young priest named Father Matteo was assigned to the Vatican as garden staff. It was a quiet assignment meant to keep him close to his books and away from politics. But Father Matteo was curious by nature. He often wandered the gardens early in the morning, before the sun touched the domes, when the mist still clung to the ground. One morning he saw it, a gap between the trees, where there had never been a path before. Drawn by instinct more than thought, Father Matteo followed it. The deeper he went, the quieter the world became. The fountains no longer sang, and even the birds seemed to hold their breath. At the end of the path stood the arch, half buried among the branches, with the entrance blocked by an iron door covered in rust. On the door, engraved in Latin, were the words, "Haec veritas dormit," here lies the truth. Father Matteo reported what he had seen to his superior, but when they returned the next morning, the path had disappeared. The grove was sealed by thorny bushes, and there was no trace of the arch. For years, Father Matteo tried to find the path again. In every season, at every hour of the day and night, he searched for it. Once, during a storm in 1961, he thought he glimpsed it again, but when he stepped forward, lightning struck the tree next to him, and the vision vanished. After his death in 1978, Vatican archivists found something strange among his personal effects. In a locked drawer of his desk, there was a single page torn from an ancient manuscript. It showed a hand-drawn map of the gardens, with a red line marking a path that snaked like a serpent, ending at a stone arch. On the back of the page were 6 words, written in Father Matteo's careful handwriting. It does not want to be found. No one knows where the page came from. The writing does not match any known book in the archives, and even today, some say that if you walk the garden before dawn, you might still find that path. But if you do, remember this: the truth it hides may not be the one you desire. In the heart of Vatican City, where every step echoes on stone and time itself seems to flow more slowly, there is a silence more powerful than the ringing of bells. It is not the silence of reverence, but of secrets. A silence zealously guarded by men in red and purple, men who move quietly behind closed doors. They are not just men of the Church. Some whisper that they are part of something much older than the Church itself. They call it the Whisper Network. No one knows when it began, but documents kept in the Apostolic Palace hint at its existence as early as the 15th century. Initially, it was thought to be nothing more than an informal group of advisors, cardinals, and priests exchanging opinions and advice in secret corners of the city. But over time, its power grew. Not through loud proclamations, but through nods and letters written in invisible ink. One man who dared to investigate was Monsignor Paolo Bellini. In 1992, he was assigned to the Congregation for Bishops, a dicastery responsible for selecting the future leaders of the Church. Monsignor Bellini was a quiet and thoughtful man, but he had a habit of noticing things others ignored. Seemingly sudden appointments, transfers of bishops without reason, entire dioceses reorganized in silence. One night, while organizing old files in a back room of the archive, Bellini found something strange. A letter with no date, no signature, and no official seal. It simply said, "He does not know. Get rid of him before he asks again." Hidden in the folder was a photograph of a bishop who had recently retired for health reasons. Bellini was concerned. He began to investigate. In the following months, Bellini discovered other letters, all anonymous. All alluded to secret initiatives carried out behind the scenes. Every time a bishop disappeared from public life, Bellini found a note. Some were simple, others were chilling. Then, in early 1993, Bellini disappeared. No one could find him. His office was emptied overnight, and his name was removed from the Vatican's official records within a week. The Vatican press office issued a brief statement. Monsignor Paolo Bellini has decided to retire from public service and devote himself to prayer. But those who knew him said he would never have left without a fight. Years later, in a hidden compartment behind a wooden panel in his old office, someone found an envelope. Inside were copies of the mysterious letters and a single key. The key bore the image of 3 interlocking rings, a symbol never found in any known Vatican department. It was never confirmed what that key opened, but according to a former archivist, the same symbol was engraved on the floor of a small windowless room beneath the Apostolic Palace, a room said to have no doors, only a whisper. Under the golden gardens of the Vatican, where the air smells of pines, roses, and stone worn by time, there is a path that seems to lead nowhere. Most visitors do not even notice it. It begins with a low iron gate, hidden behind ivy, far from the well-tended paths where popes and pilgrims once walked. Those who find it say the gate is always cool to the touch, no matter the weather, and beyond it stretches the vanishing path. The gardeners call it the Lost Path. Only a few remember how it first appeared. Some say it was discovered by chance in 1978 by a gardener named Emilio. Emilio was an old man with a hunched back and a love for silence. He had worked in the Vatican gardens for 40 years, rising before dawn and finishing his work only after the bells stopped ringing. One morning, Emilio noticed something strange. A patch of grass he had mowed the day before had grown back, but it was not just grass. A row of tiny white stones had appeared where there had been nothing before. The stones curved gently toward a tall hedge, then seemed to disappear. Intrigued, Emilio followed the path. The stones led him through hedges he had pruned for decades, but now they curved in ways he had never seen before. The birds fell silent, the air grew colder, and then he found himself in a clearing that should not have been there. In the centre was a fountain, but it was not just any fountain. It was made of black marble, the water clear as crystal, and it made no sound. He stared at the pool and saw something move beneath the surface. Not a fish, but a light. A light that pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. When he blinked, it was gone. He left in silence, shocked. The next day, the path had disappeared. The hedge had returned to its normal shape. The stones were gone. Emilio tried again and again to find the path, but it never appeared. He told no one until years later, when a young priest interviewed him for a book about the Vatican gardens. The priest, Father Luca, became obsessed with Emilio's story, searched maps, talked to the gardeners, even prayed for a sign. One night he claimed to have found the garden on the other side was wild and untamed, shrouded in silence. Ivy clung to marble figures, and jagged stones poked up from the earth like ancient remains. At the heart of this hidden place, a ring of cypress trees formed a perfect enclosure. Within that circle stood an old stone bench, its surface inscribed with the words, "Look back, but only once." Elias paused there, puzzled by the phrase. Driven by either instinct or curiosity, he glanced over his shoulder. Behind him there was no trail, no entrance, just thick, quiet woods. The garden had changed. Suddenly a gentle voice murmured a word he didn't know from somewhere behind him. He spun around but found no one. Yet now something rested on the bench. A faded black and white photo, its edges curled, showing a group of men in cassocks standing in that very garden. One of the men was the spitting image of Elias. Alarmed, he stood and tried to retrace his way, but the hedges had shifted. Only after hours of wandering, guided by the distant sound of Vatican bells, did he find his way back to where he began. When he told his superior what happened, he was dismissed and reassigned within days. The photograph vanished without a trace. Some claim the path of disappearance only appears when the church has secrets to hide. Others think it's a trial for those who probe too deeply. In the Vatican, not every wall is stone. and not every path moves forward. Some trails twist backward through time, carrying memories that haven't yet happened. And somewhere, deep in that secret garden, a voice still calls to those who dare to sit on the bench and look back, even for a moment. There's a part of the Vatican few ever glimpse, hidden behind layers of marble and gold, velvet drapes and silent doors. It's not a place you'll find on any map. According to believers, it shifts and moves. They call it the Web of Whispers. The name has nothing to do with technology or the modern world. It's a circle of men in red and black, senior cardinals who have served the church for decades. They meet when the bells are quiet and the corridors empty. Their conversations don't happen in grand cathedrals, but in dim passageways, sometimes underground, near old crypts where the air smells of parchment and stone. One of them was Cardinal Matteo. He had served since his youth, rising quietly through the ranks. He never sought the spotlight. He preferred to listen. He was always listening. That's what made him so important to the others. He knew the tales no one else heard. In the winter of 2011, Matteo received a letter. It was delivered directly to his quarters. No stamp, no seal, no signature. The message was brief. You have seen the fresco. You know it was never painted. The words weighed heavily on him. There could be only one fresco, it meant. A secret artwork hidden in the Apostolic Palace, behind the tapestry hall. Only a handful had ever seen it, and all had sworn secrecy. The fresco showed an angel in a field of stars, but it glimmered with an odd light. When sunlight touched it, the wings seemed to move, not just from shifting shadows, but as if something deeper, like a breath, animated them. Some believed the paint was mixed with fragments of a fallen star. Others whispered it hadn't been painted at all, but had simply appeared overnight, leaving the wall untouched. Matteo had glimpsed it once, long ago, led there by a dying bishop who told him some truths must be seen to be believed. Now, years later, the web of whispers was stirring. Someone had unearthed an ancient record hidden deep in the Vatican's secret archives. It described a vision from 1250, a monk's dream of an angel falling from the sky, not as punishment, but as a warning. The fresco matched the vision perfectly. Matteo felt the walls of the church closing in. If the angel wasn't sent to protect, why did it watch? Who had brought the painting to life? That night he burned the letter and watched the flames, while somewhere in the palace, away from visitors and pilgrims, the angel's eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, waiting for someone to remember. There's a place in the Vatican where even the gardens keep secrets, hidden behind walls too tall for outsiders to see over. The Vatican gardens stretch out like a secret world, untouched by Rome's bustle. Manicured hedges twist around ancient fountains. Rare flowers bloom under the care of gardeners whose identities remain unknown. But the most intriguing thing about these gardens isn't their beauty, but a path that seems to disappear. It's called the Vanishing Path, though no official map shows it. Only those who have walked it know it's real. One such person was a gardener named Luca. Since 1979, he had tended the gardens, pruning olive trees and watering roses in silence. He never questioned, never spoke much. That's why the older priests trusted him. And so on, he moved closer, expecting to hear only his own breath. Initially, there was silence, then a voice emerged. Not loud, not clear, but unmistakably human. It spoke in Latin, melodious and rhythmic, like a prayer or a warning. Andreas tensed. He only caught a few words. Veritas, corona, perditio. Truth, crown, ruin. The next night, he returned with a hidden recorder. He pressed it against the stone and waited. The voice appeared again, but when he played the recording later, it was empty. Yet, every night after, the whisper returned, right on time. The voice began to say names. Some were familiar, popes, long-dead cardinals, even monarchs. Others were unknown, but spoken with urgency. One name was repeated often: Ludovico. Andreas searched the Vatican archives and found a Cardinal Ludovico who served in the 16th century. He vanished without a trace in 1584. His last recorded action was delivering a sealed letter to the Pope. That letter was never opened. The records end there. A month later, Andreas was abruptly reassigned. He was transferred far from the Vatican and ordered never to mention the listening wall again. Years later, he returned as a visitor. The wall was still there, plain and mute, but when he approached one last time, he heard only 5 words: "Do not let them know," and he never did. But the wall still listens, and sometimes, just before dawn, it speaks again. There's a single key within the Vatican that no one wants to guard. It is not made of gold or silver, but dark iron polished by centuries of touch. It is called the Golden Key, not for its material, but for what it can unlock. 3 hidden locks in 3 different places in the city together guard a chamber so secret that even many cardinals doubt its existence. The story of the Golden Key dates back to 1422, when Pope Martin V brought the papacy back to Rome after the Western Schism. During that time, the Church was in turmoil. Rival claimants to the papal throne had torn Europe apart. Faith wavered, authority was unstable. To protect certain documents from political machinations and flames, the Pope ordered the construction of an underground crypt. But this crypt was unique. It had no single access. Instead, 3 separate doors were made, placed at a distance from each other to reach it, and each door had a unique lock. Only the Golden Key could unlock all 3. The key was passed on only once per generation, from one trusted hand to another. Whoever received it had no titles, held no official positions, and swore eternal silence. Their task was not to protect the deposit, but to remember where the locks were. In 1970, a man named Father Gianni was chosen. He had worked in the Vatican Library for decades, a discreet scholar with no ambitions. When he first received the key, he did not understand its meaning. Only years later, approaching retirement, did he begin to investigate. The first lock was in a wall behind the chapel of St. Cecilia, engraved in a fresco where no one ever looked. The second lay beneath a floor tile in the Apostolic Palace, marked with a symbol that shone only in the moonlight. The third was the hardest to find. It was hidden inside the arm of a statue in the Vatican gardens, a statue that changed position once every decade, though no one ever moved it deliberately. When Father Gianni turned the last lock, the atmosphere around him changed. A panel opened, revealing a narrow passage. At the end, he discovered a small chamber lined with lead. Inside lay 5 objects: a rolled-up parchment, a sealed letter, a pair of worn leather shoes, an unlit candle, and a tiny gold ring too small for any finger. He never revealed to anyone what he read in the parchment. He put the key back where he had found it and left the chamber, sealing the 3 doors behind him. It is said that after that night, Father Gianni aged rapidly, not from illness, but from knowledge. And the Golden Key disappeared again, waiting for the next custodian to be chosen based on silence, not rank. In the centre of the Vatican there is a garden no one speaks of. It does not appear on any official tour, and its gate is always closed. The bushes are trimmed, the flowers bloom every spring, but no visitor can cross its wrought-iron gate. The employees who work within the walls call it the Garden of the Vanishing Path. Not just for its stillness or its unsettling nighttime tranquility, but for what happens to those who walk its winding path. There was once a nun named Sister Caterina. She arrived at the Vatican in 1995, sent from a small convent in northern Italy. She was quiet, meditative, and loved to walk in the gardens. She often spent nights praying among the olive trees, watching the stars appear above the tiled rooftops. One night she found open a gate that had always been closed. It led to a garden she had never seen before. The air inside was different, as if the sky itself was closer. There were no birds singing, no guards around, only a stone path, narrow and winding like a ribbon laid on the ground. Sister Caterina entered and followed it. She walked for what seemed only a few minutes, but when she came out, the sun had set and the Vatican bells were ringing midnight. Confused, she asked the nuns in the dormitory if they had seen her leave. No one had seen her. One said she had been missing since morning. The next day she returned to the garden, but the gate was closed. The path she had walked no longer existed, now covered in vines and fallen petals. She told no one, except an elderly priest, who listened without reacting. His name was Father Lorenzo. He told her he had once entered that same garden, many years before, when he was a young seminarian. He too had followed the path and returned, discovering that the clocks had advanced much more than he thought. But what disturbed him most was not the lost time. It was the sound. He had heard voices along the path, not earthly voices, but voices that vibrated beneath the surface of his thoughts. They did not articulate words, only memories, his and others, intertwined in the wind. Sister Caterina never returned, but every year, on the same day, the gate of the vanished path opens for just one night. The Vatican gardeners notice it but never speak of it, and those who have tried to follow the path again have only found a wall. Some claim the garden is not a place but a decision, a test for those who still believe time is linear and that secrets always remain hidden. But within the Vatican, the earth remembers, and sometimes the path reappears for those who do not seek but are called. There are places in the Vatican where the walls seem to breathe, where even the faintest noise travels too far, and where whispers travel farther than footsteps. Deep within those walls, hidden beneath the surface of ceremony and splendour, there is a network of voices that never rise above a whisper. The cardinals walk solemnly through the marble corridors, but among them exists a chain of guardians, messengers, and keepers of secrets. They are not identified by rank, but by what they know. This secret tradition is older than many of the buildings themselves. It began in the time of Pope Innocent III at the start of the 13th century. When tensions between rival families within the church reached their peak, alliances were unstable and open power plays were too risky. Thus, the solution arose in silence. Trusted individuals were placed in strategic roles with the task not to speak but to listen. They issued no formal decrees, signed no documents, and wore no distinctive clothing, but their words, carried from one corner of the Vatican to another, shaped decisions that would transform the world. In 1962, during the Second Vatican Council, Cardinal Bellori was often seen in isolated corners, not speaking to anyone, and yet never alone. He was discreetly followed by a man dressed in simple clothes, known only as Matteo. Matteo carried no books or documents, only questions. And at night he reported what he heard in a small room beneath the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. That room had no windows, but it had a table carved with strange symbols, older than the Vatican itself. Few had ever entered, and even fewer had returned. The Room of Tears sits just behind the Sistine Chapel, a chamber where the newly elected Pope retreats alone for the first time after the white smoke signals his selection. There he dons the papal vestments and breathes as the shepherd of over 1 billion faithful. But on this occasion, Father Tommaso wasn't delivering ceremonial garments. He carried something far older. Inside his envelope was a thick piece of parchment and a single crimson thread. As he stepped into the Room of Tears, a chill swept over him. The velvet chairs were deserted, the wall mirror shrouded by a cloth. Only a faint light crept in through the heavy drapes. Tommaso set the envelope on the table and turned to leave, but paused. On the back wall, partly hidden by a crooked painting, he noticed a message scrawled in faded chalk. The words read, "He who witnesses the first tear must never speak the second." The script was odd, wavering and looping as if written in one continuous motion. Tommaso kept the discovery to himself. Yet the next day, during the celebration, he collapsed unexpectedly. Vatican physicians found nothing wrong, but when he awoke, he was mute. His voice was gone for good. He tried to write down what had happened, but each time he picked up a pen, his hand shook so violently that his notes were illegible. It was as if something from that room had followed him, demanding silence. A month later, the envelope Tommaso had delivered resurfaced in the papal apartments, still sealed and untouched. No one could explain how it got there or who had moved it. That same year, the Room of Tears was repainted, erasing the chalk message. Tommaso never resumed his duties. He was sent to a secluded monastery in the hills near Rome, where he lived until his death in 2011. In his final days, he began sketching the same image over and over, a single, weeping eye, always faceless. The drawings were found neatly stacked beneath his bed, and on the top sheet he had managed to write one clear sentence: "Some tears do not belong to this world." The Vatican never addressed his silence, and the Room of Tears remains, waiting. In the year 2000, a German man entered the Vatican under a false name. He wasn't a diplomat or a clergyman, but a master watchmaker named Johannes Keller. He had been quietly summoned by an elderly cardinal whose name appears nowhere in official records. His task was simple: repair a clock hidden within the papal apartment's walls. Johannes was not led through the main entrance, but through a narrow passage beneath the apostolic palace. An anonymous Swiss guard guided him through winding stone corridors, ancient and root-like. They stopped at a wooden door, and the guard handed Johannes a key that looked older than Rome itself. Inside was a closet-sized space, dust swirling in the air, and in the centre stood a tall iron-framed clock with no face, no numbers, just unmoving hands. Examining the mechanism, Johannes found it unlike any clock he'd seen. Its workings were laced with fine silver ribbons inscribed with symbols, Latin perhaps, or something even older. He worked in silence for hours, and as he adjusted the final gear, the hands began to move backward, slowly, steadily, as if reversing time. That night, Johannes was not allowed to leave. He was given a bare room with no windows and a single candle. In the morning, he found his suitcase packed by someone else. His tools were gone, replaced by a black leather-bound book titled in gold, "The Clock That Counts What Heaven Does Not Count." Inside were detailed drawings of clocks that didn't measure time, one with 27 hands, another with none, only shifting shadows. On the last page, a note from the same hand that summoned him. "There are moments history erases. This clock keeps them." Johannes was escorted out of the city and told never to return. Yet years later, a peculiar clock appeared in a Munich museum's private collection. It had no face, no hands, no ticking. But once a year, on April 9th at exactly 3:26 a.m., it chimed 12 times. That was the hour Pope John Paul II was found dead in 1978. The cause was never determined, no autopsy was performed, just a prayer and a sealed report. The clock still chimes and the Vatican remains silent, the quiet growing heavier each year. In the winter of 1961, the Vatican held a secret mass before sunrise, a ceremony not listed on any calendar. Only a select group of clergy attended, and none ever spoke of it. The mass wasn't held in a chapel, but in the oldest part of Vatican territory, beside the hidden wall of the Teutonic Cemetery. The priest who led it was never named, but witnesses described his voice as trembling, not from age, but from fear. The Mass was for the forgotten dead, those who never received a burial. For centuries, rumours had circulated about a hidden record beneath the papal archive's floor, a book listing not saints or martyrs, but people who died within the Vatican, whose bodies were never claimed, whose stories were never told. Some were visitors, some workers, others never identified. In the early 1900s, a fire swept through the archive's north wing. Many thought it was an accident, but when the smoke cleared, a sealed metal box was found under a loose stone. Inside was the record. Its cover was burned, but the pages inside were untouched, written in red ink. Each entry had a name, a date, and a Latin phrase, "Anima non transitit," the soul has not passed. No one could explain its meaning. In the 1970s, a young seminarian named Marco del Vento was assigned to study the record. He suspected it was linked to an old tradition of silent prayers for those the church could not absolve. One night, while copying a page, he noticed something odd. Each name had a number beside it, not a year or code, but a time. 323, 211, 404. At first he thought these were times of death, but then he saw his own name on the last page, dated 3 weeks in the future. He told no one. The next morning he left the Vatican and hid in a northern Italian monastery. On the 29th of that month, at exactly 5:07 a.m, Marco was found in his room. No injuries, no struggle, a peaceful look on his face. On his desk, his final words: "The Mass of the Forgotten is not for the dead, but for those the world should have forgotten, but hasn't." Since then, the Vatican has relocated the record, but its current whereabouts remain a secret. And every year, when they open the chamber, the coffin remains sealed and the mummy's eyes stay closed, but the sheets always move. The Vatican has never issued a statement, and the room remains under constant surveillance because not all the dead are dead, and not all secrets sleep. In the shadow of the Vatican there is a Mass that no one announces. It's not on any calendar, it doesn't appear in any bulletin, nor is it mentioned in sermons. But every year, at an hour when Rome sleeps, and even the city's bells are silent, a secret gathering is held. They call it the Mass of the Forgotten Dead. It begins with 12 candles lit in a semicircle beneath the chapel of St. Lawrence, a crypt far below the marble floors of the Vatican. The air is always cold there, not because of the stones, but because of something deeper. The priests who attend do not wear ornate vestments, only simple dark woolen robes, and their names are never recorded. They are chosen in silence, by invitation only, and each brings with him a story that connects him to those who cannot rest. The Mass is offered for souls lost to history, those buried in unmarked graves, those condemned without trial, those whose deaths were never mourned. But there is another reason, whispered among the chosen. It is said that the Vatican keeps a secret book of the unknown, not saints, not sinners, but people who disappeared in the service of the Church. Archivists who read the wrong scrolls, guards who entered the crypts and never returned. Children adopted by the Vatican and never seen again. At the centre of the ceremony is a chalice, unlike any other. It is carved from volcanic glass and is cold to the touch, even in firelight. No one knows where it comes from. Some believe it was recovered from the catacombs beneath the necropolis. Others say it was found in the tomb of a bishop whose name was never revealed. The priest who celebrates the Mass speaks a single name aloud, just one, then silence. Each year a new name is spoken, and each year a gust of wind sweeps through the room, though no door has opened. Sometimes the candles flicker. Sometimes they go out completely. A priest, Father Matteo, served at the Mass for 7 years. On the 8th, he left. No transfer, no farewell. His room was found in perfect order, except for a single note left on the bed. It read, "He remembered a name not written in the book, and now walks with them." No one else dared ask whose name was spoken. The Church does not confirm the Mass, but every year, on the anniversary of the first gathering, The guards near the chapel of St. Lawrence hear low voices echoing in the crypt. Some say they sound like prayers, others say they are laments, but once in the silence, a guard swore he heard something else. Laughter, and not the comforting kind, the kind that remembers. In the dark corridors of the Vatican Apostolic Library, hidden behind a false panel in an ancient marble wall, it is said there is a file unlike any other. It is not marked with a name or title, bears no seal, no coat of arms, no Latin blessing, only a number, 77. The file, according to a retired archivist named Leone, is kept in a leather case so worn by time that the edges have begun to peel like the bark of an old tree. Leone claimed to have seen it once by chance during the winter of 1972. He was delivering coded manuscripts to the inner vault when a cardinal called him into a private room, mistaking him for someone else. On the desk was the briefcase. Leone never opened it, but as he bent to set down the papers, the flap opened just enough for him to glimpse what was inside. Photographs. They were black and white, grainy, but not old. One showed a man dressed in papal garments, though his face matched no known pope. Another showed a church in flames, with hooded figures surrounding it, their backs to the fire. But the third photo was the one that chilled him most. It showed a figure kneeling before an altar, and the altar was not in any Vatican chapel, it was underground. Beneath the altar something was carved into the stone, a symbol Leone had seen only once before in the margins of a forbidden book kept in the Jesuit archives. A symbol that, in ancient writings, meant the end of the covenant. When he looked up, the cardinal was watching him, calmly, silently, without anger. He simply closed the briefcase and said, "You haven't seen this." Leone nodded, gathered his papers, and left. He never spoke of it until decades later, when his mind began to fail and his memory no longer knew which secrets were still kept. But the file, number 77, was always the same in his story. Some believe it contains evidence of occult rituals performed during a crisis in the early 20th century, when the Church feared its power was waning. Others claim it contains a list of those who participated in a ceremony to bind the authority of the papacy to something even older than Christianity, a pact sealed in silence, witnessed only by the stones. The Vatican denies the existence of such a file, but every 10 years a new security protocol is quietly added to the restricted wing of the library. More locks, more checks, and there is always a guard outside the reading room, where no books are ever requested. Some say the room is empty, but one night a cleaner swore he saw a faint red glow under the door and the sound of pages turning, very slowly. It was 1939, and the world was holding its breath. War had returned to Europe like an awakened storm. Inside the Vatican, Pope Pius V walked alone in the gardens in the early hours of the morning, hands clasped behind his back and eyes downcast. His silence was not just prayer, it was the weight of something more. A week before Germany invaded Poland, a letter arrived at the Vatican by diplomatic mail. Not from a world leader, not from a bishop, it was unsigned. No sender, just a parchment envelope sealed with black wax and bearing a coat of arms no one could identify. Inside was a memorandum. 9 sentences, 9 brief lines that, according to one of the few men who read it, detailed events that had not yet occurred. The second sentence predicted the exact date of the invasion. The 6th warned of attacks in Rome that had not yet been planned. And the final sentence was not a prediction, it was an order. Do not forget the crypt beneath the second papal crypt. The oath must be spoken again. The Pope did not speak publicly of the letter, but according to a private diary obtained by Cardinal Montini, who later became Pope Paul VI, that same night a secret mass was held in a section of the Vatican catacombs, closed to all visitors. Only 4 men attended. No choir, no candles, just a single stone altar, older than the Basilica itself, and carved into the wall behind it, almost faded by time, was the same coat of arms that had sealed the letter. When war broke out, the Pope's public position was neutral, but in the Vatican's private rooms a silent action began, not only to protect human lives, but to protect history itself. During the darkest days of the war, sacred objects disappeared from Vatican display cases, carried by Jesuit emissaries through hidden passages that even some princes of the Church did not know. Yet one artifact remained unfound. An ancient key, said by legend to date back to the time of the first Christians. It was said to unlock a passage forgotten for centuries. One prince of the church thought it had been stolen in the chaos of war. His brother doubted it ever existed. Still, in the final months of the conflict, a soldier stationed near Rome found a bag among the ruins of an aristocratic mansion destroyed by bombing. Inside, there is a prophecy whispered in the corners of the Vatican where sunlight never reaches. It is not written in the catechism nor spoken in sermons, but survives among the pages of forbidden texts and floats in the voices of elderly cardinals. It speaks of a final pope, the last to wear the fisherman's ring, whose reign will not end with death, but with silence. It is said that the prophecy of the last pope was received by an Irish monk named Malachy in the year 1094. After a pilgrimage to Rome, upon returning home, he collapsed, feverish and trembling. As he lay in bed, he described a vision unlike any he had ever had, a procession of popes, wrapped in light and shadow, passing through doors of fire. Each was identified by a simple, strange Latin phrase. He wrote them all down, 112. Most of the world has dismissed the prophecy for centuries, but within the Vatican, archivists kept watch over it. Each new pope seemed to fit the descriptions, at least vaguely, until the list ran out. And then came the one Malachy had called Peter the Roman. Some believe this final figure has already arrived, others say he has yet to emerge. But the fear persists, because Malachy's prophecy does not end with the death of the last pope. It ends with the destruction of Rome. There was a curious moment in 2005, shortly after the funeral of Pope John Paul II. As the crowd gathered in St. Peter's Square, thunder rumbled in the clear sky. Lightning struck the dome. Some said it was just bad weather, but a Swiss guard on duty that night swore the air had changed, as if something had shifted underground. That same week, an elderly nun named Sister Beatrice was found kneeling in the Basilica at midnight, eyes closed, whispering. When approached, she opened her eyes and said, "It is already here, only you are too afraid to name it." She died 3 days later. Her diary was sealed and removed by Vatican officials. A note written in her final hours slipped out. It read, "The last pope will not know he is the last. That is why the doors will open without a sound." The Vatican has never officially commented on the prophecy, though it remains one of the most requested documents in private investigations in the secret archive. Some maintain it is mere folklore. Others, seeing how the world darkens, believe the prophecy is not about a single man, but an era, a moment that seems to draw closer with each passing day. And when that moment comes, it is said the bells of Rome will ring only once. And then, never again. There is a chamber beneath the Vatican, rarely spoken of, never named aloud in official documents. Those who know it call it the Red Cross Room. Not for any visible symbol, but for what happens within its walls. Only a few are allowed to enter, and fewer still leave unchanged. The chamber is buried deep, even below the lowest levels of the Apostolic Palace. It is said to be older than many parts of the Vatican itself, built from a stone unlike any used in the surrounding halls, cold to the touch, even in summer. It is always silent, no matter the noise from above. No echo, no breath. The legend of the Red Cross Room begins with Pope Sylvester II, a man known for his obsession with knowledge. He was a brilliant scholar, expert in mathematics and Arabic philosophy, and was rumoured to have come into contact with other worldly powers. Some say he was the first to lock the room, placing 3 seals on the door and writing a single phrase in ancient Greek above it. To open is to invite. No one knows exactly what is inside, but those granted access, high prelates, exorcists, even visiting heads of state, always return pale, silent, and more devout than before. One cardinal, after spending only an hour inside, resigned his post the next morning and retired to a silent monastery in the Spanish hills. He never spoke of what he saw, only insisted it was not the time. In 1999, during the full moon, a strange event occurred. The Vatican's seismic sensors detected movement beneath the palace, a faint rumble, followed by a weak vibration that lasted 7 minutes. Technicians ruled out tectonic activity. No one could explain it, but the room was inspected the next day. One of the 3 seals had broken. Father Matteo, a Jesuit working in Vatican security at the time, was present at the inspection. He described a faint humming coming from behind the door, as if a choir were singing in a language older than Latin. He said it made his hair stand on end. He tried to record it, but the tape came back empty. He died 5 years later. His diary was found hidden under his bed. One entry stood out. The room is not just a place, it is a memory the church buried before it was born, and one day it will remember us. Even today, the door to the Red Cross room remains sealed, but not by human hands. It is said to have closed on its own, and no one knows what sings behind it. In the deepest part of the Vatican, beyond the catacombs and relic chambers, there is a spiral staircase descending to a forgotten chapel. This place is not marked on any tourist map. No visitors are admitted. The priests who once served there disappeared long ago, their names erased from the records. Some claim they were not removed by the church, but by something much older. The forbidden chapel beneath St. Peter's Basilica is carved into the earth itself. The air inside smells of stone and something vaguely metallic, like old blood. The candlelight here never flickers. The shadows remain still. The walls are painted with strange symbols, nothing like the sacred art above. The style is older than Christian Rome, older even than Jerusalem. No one agrees on who created them or why. A former Vatican archivist, Father Alonso, risked everything to copy a fragment of the writing on a wall before retiring in 1983. He believed it was a warning, not a prayer. The phrase he translated read, "Let no one wake what sleeps here." But the most unsettling part of the chapel is not the symbols or the silence. It is the altar. Unlike any other altar in the Vatican, this one is black, not made of marble, but of a stone that appears in no geological documentation, cold even under fire. It does not reflect light. In the centre of the altar is a bowl carved into the surface. No one knows what it was used for, or at least no one who will speak of it. A report surfaced in 2012. A group of workers tasked with reinforcing the structural base beneath the chapel by Vatican order had been told the area was unused. But when they arrived, they found the black altar lit by candles, new ones, melted wax still dripping. The smell of incense was strong, though none had been burned in the Vatican that day. Security footage showed no one had entered the chapel in the previous 72 hours. One worker took a photo, only one. His camera was confiscated within an hour, but he managed to send the image to his brother. It showed a figure dressed in red standing behind the altar. The figure's face was obscured by shadow, yet the glow around it seemed like fire. The worker disappeared 3 days later. His brother said the last message he received was a voice recording. In it, the worker whispered, "It's not a chapel, it's a door, and someone is waiting on the other side." Even today, the church claims the forbidden chapel is closed for renovations, but the candles, they say, are always lit. even when there is no one to light them. In the highest crypt of the Apostolic Palace, there is a single book locked behind glass. It is bound in pale leather, its spine cracked with age, the pages yellowed and curled at the edges. The title is written in Latin, but even translated it says almost nothing, simply Rituale Obscura, that is, the ritual that was never to be spoken. The book is not catalogued in the Vatican library. It appears in no known index, yet it is guarded under armed watch. 2 members of the Swiss Guard watch over it at all times, even when no visitors are expected. It is said the book was found in 1921, hidden in the double back of a confessional in a remote chapel near the Alps. The priest who discovered it died that same week, though the official cause of death was listed as unknown, heart failure. The only clue left was a letter, handwritten and stained with ash. In it, he wrote a single phrase: "The words speak." A cardinal named Sebastian Morelli was one of the few who dared to study the book in secret. Known for his quiet nature and deep loyalty to the Church, Morelli disappeared from public life after reading the first third of the text. He later confided to an ecclesiastical colleague that the ritual was not simply meant to summon something, but to seal something away. That was when the rumours began to circulate. The Vatican is no stranger to rituals. Every rite. He was taken underground, beyond the known crypts, down a black marble staircase that seemed to vibrate beneath his feet. At the end, he saw a chapel with no altar, no cross, no windows, only a round polished stone in the centre of the chamber. The stone was warm, though the room was freezing. When he reached out to touch it, the candles lining the chamber lit themselves, not with a flame, but with a cold blue light. They told him nothing, only that he should sit and listen. That night, Father Arlo wrote in his diary that the stone began to whisper. Not in Spanish, not in Latin, but with a voice that called him by name. It revealed things no one else could have known, things about his childhood, his fears, the future of the Church. It spoke of the stars and of what watched them from behind. He was never seen on the surface again. Years later, in the early 20th century, a young Swiss guard named Elias found a loose tile in the wall near the Vatican archives. Behind it, a rusted little box. Inside were fragments of Father Arlo's diary, along with a map of a circular chamber and a warning engraved on a thin sheet of bone. Only silence holds it back. Elias disappeared a month later. No trace, no resignation, not even a mention in the guard's records. The forbidden chapel has become legend even among those sworn to secrecy. Some claim it was sealed again by Pope Pius IX. Others say it was never sealed, only hidden, waiting for the next priest who dreams in blue fire. But sometimes, during restoration work deep in the catacombs, workers report hearing something through the stone. Not voices, not music. A soft, slow breathing, as if something in the darkness remains watchful, waiting for someone to answer the whisper, waiting for the silence to break. In the quiet hours before dawn, when even the marble saints seem to sleep, there is a ritual the Vatican has never spoken of openly. A ceremony whispered in ancient documents, known only by its code name, the rite of the unspoken. The archives do not list it. No pope has ever acknowledged it. Yet the stories persist like smoke in a sealed chamber. It all begins, they say, with a single word. A word never written, but passed from mouth to mouth, like a secret too dangerous to keep. Only a handful of people have been chosen to speak it. One of them was a young priest named Matteo, born in Naples and brought to Rome in 1962. He was gifted, quiet, and deeply devout. But there was something more. Matteo could hear prayers that were never spoken aloud. He claimed the walls of the Vatican spoke to him, repeating the words left by thousands of pilgrims. Desperate prayers, frightened prayers, prayers that ended in silence. Some believed him, most did not, until the morning he collapsed in the Sistine Chapel, eyes wide open, whispering in a language no one recognized. They found him hours later in the archives, sitting cross-legged before a locked chest that had not been opened since the time of Pope Leo VI. When the guards tried to move him, he wept, not out of fear, but out of reverence. He said the voice had returned, and this time it came from beneath the Vatican itself. Hidden in a corner of the archives was a narrow passage, blocked by iron bars. Behind them, steps led to a forgotten chapel, older than any other. The ceiling had no paintings, the floor was smooth as glass. In the centre was a book made entirely of stone. Matteo was the only one allowed to enter. He stepped into the chamber barefoot, and with each step the candles along the wall lit up. He placed his hand on the stone book and spoke the word, the unspoken one, passed from pope to pope through the generations. The book split. A single breath of icy air swept through the chamber, and then silence, a deep, ancient silence that made the marble tremble. When Matteo returned, his voice was gone, not hoarse, not low, simply vanished. He never spoke again, but he smiled often, like someone who has heard the end of a story we could never know. He died in 1983. In his cell, beneath his pillow, they found a slip of paper. On it were just 4 words. The word has returned. No one knows what it meant, but sometimes, in the middle of the night, when the Vatican's corridors fall silent, the air stirs, just enough to carry something faint. A whisper, almost too weak to perceive, sounding like a name, but not yours. In the dark corners of the Vatican, where ancient stones echo with ancient prayers, there is a locked door whose key is unknown. The frame is carved from black walnut, polished by the hands of those who dared to touch it. Above the arch, in faded Latin, is a single phrase, Quod non licet sire, what must not be known. This door is not on any official Vatican map. Not even the Swiss guards who pass by every night know where it leads. Some think it's a forgotten storage room, others say it's a sealed chamber from before the Basilica was built, but some believe something different. They believe it's a threshold not meant for the living. In 1974, a young archivist named Lorenzo Ricci noticed the door. He had come to the Vatican Library as part of a team translating medieval texts. Quiet and observant, Lorenzo had a talent for spotting details others missed, and one night, in the middle of a storm, he noticed something strange. The door was ajar. It should have been locked. Drawn by a curiosity stronger than fear, Lorenzo entered. What he found was not a chamber, but a spiral staircase, deeper than seemed possible. Each step was inscribed with words in a dozen languages, most lost to time. The walls were lined with mirrors that did not reflect the person looking into them. Instead, they reflected moments, memories that did not belong to Lorenzo. As he descended, the air grew thick and cold, as if the stones themselves held their breath. At the end, he reached a circular chamber. In the centre was a pedestal on which rested a crown, not of gold or silver, but carved entirely from bone. Lorenzo reached out to it, and just before his fingers touched the crown, he heard a voice. It did not come from the chamber, but from within him, a voice that called his name and then asked him a question no one should ever hear. He never revealed what the question was. Lorenzo returned from that staircase changed. His hair turned white in a matter of days. His hands trembled, even at rest. He resigned from the archive without explanation and moved to a small village near Lake Como, where he spent the rest of his life painting scenes he refused to explain. Every painting showed the same crown, each one slightly different. In one it floated above the Vatican, In another, it was buried under the sea. But in another, hidden until his death, the crown rested on the head of a faceless pope. When Vatican officials visited him in 1986 to ask about the door, Lorenzo simply smiled and said, "The door is not closed, it is waiting." The next morning, the door had vanished. Where it once was, there was only stone, smooth, intact, as if there had never been a door. But some say that on rainy nights, if you listen closely near the north wall of the archives, you can still hear footsteps descending into nothingness. It is said the Vatican never truly sleeps. Even in the quietest hours, behind the ancient stones and gilded walls, whispers can be heard, not of voices, but of paper, fragile pages dry, rustling softly in hidden corridors, where the smell of old ink lingers longer than the light. In a forgotten nook of the secret archive, hidden behind a false bookshelf labelled Vitae Sanctorum, lies a single scroll tightly wrapped in red silk. It is not catalogued, not referenced, not even named. The story begins with Father Paolo Benedetti, a thoughtful and calm-minded man. He worked as a translator in the archives for nearly 20 years, specialising in obscure Aramaic dialect. The approximate translation read, "To discover the breath of Enoch, follow the lineage not of kings but of guardians." For most men, these were just meaningless words, but for Father Giancarlo, a passionate scholar of the forbidden book of Enoch, they were a call he could not ignore. He began his research within the Vatican walls, examining genealogical trees, secret maps, and architectural designs abandoned centuries ago. After months of obsessive searching, he found something peculiar on an old map from 1597, a staircase marked with a single word, "Fall." That staircase had long since disappeared, at least from visible structures, but with the help of an elderly Jesuit engineer, Father Giancarlo traced its foundations to an area beneath the Vatican gardens, now overgrown and in ruins. It was thought to be nothing more than an old storeroom sealed centuries before. One night, completely alone, Giancarlo forced open a rusty iron gate and descended a hidden staircase behind ivy and rocks. The descent seemed to last an eternity, until the flame of his lantern faintly illuminated a polished wooden door. On its surface was carved a symbol he had seen only once before, on a page of the lost scroll of Enoch. He pushed hard to open it. Inside was a round chamber, silent and perfectly dry. In the centre stood a pedestal of white stone, like ivory. On it rested a small glass container filled with a swirling golden mist. Giancarlo reached out to take it, but as soon as his hand approached, the mist began to move on its own, dancing in strange shapes, tracing symbols suspended in the air. He did not dare touch any it. Instead, he knelt, eyes wide open, murmuring prayers he thought he had forgotten years ago. When he returned to the surface, he told no one. But from that moment, his voice changed radically. It had acquired an indefinable tone, sweet but dense, like thunder trapped in a whisper. Some say he had beheld the breath of an angel, others think he had been touched by something much older. The Vatican never sealed that chamber again. They buried it under layers of marble beneath the rose gardens, in absolute silence. In the silent heart of the Vatican, where very few are allowed to walk alone, there is a sealed door of solid cedar. It has no plaque or visible handle. Most Vatican staff pass by it without even looking, but those who have worked there long enough know it simply as the Red Door. It was first mentioned in a singular letter dated 1924, written by Monsignor Arturo Moreschi, a Vatican official responsible for organising the Apostolic Archive. The letter was addressed to a dear Venetian friend and contained a single phrase that has puzzled historians for decades. "I have crossed the Red Door," he wrote, "and what lies beyond is neither heaven nor hell, but something totally forgotten." Arturo disappeared just 3 days after sending that letter. No official explanation was ever given. His documents were quietly removed and the room where he had worked was reassigned to others. The red door, however, remained in place. What makes the red door so unsettling is not just the mystery surrounding it, but the sounds reported by those who pass by it during the night hours. A low murmur in ancient languages, a deep hum like the echo of wind in an underground tomb, and sometimes a faint melody, as if a choir were singing deep within the earth. The mystery intensified in 1961 when a newly arrived Swiss guard at the Vatican decided to investigate during his patrol shift. His name was Lucas Early, young, brave, and full of curiosity. He waited until the corridors were completely empty. When he reached the door, he found it slightly ajar, even though it was said to be permanently sealed. Lucas entered without hesitation. What he later recounted, in a brief handwritten confession found in his locker, was a room that defied all temporal logic. Tall shelves curved toward the ceiling like gnarled branches. Candles burned with blue flames, though there were no lighters or matches in sight, and in the centre of the space was a small stone table with a bowl of water, so still it did not reflect his face but that of an unknown woman. He recoiled abruptly, his heart in turmoil. He was found hours later wandering barefoot in the garden, whispering a prayer in a language never heard before. After a brief period of convalescence, he resigned his post and returned home to Zurich, categorically refusing to ever speak of the Vatican again. Since then, the Red Door has not been opened again, but some claim that once a month, in the darkest hour of the night, a single note resounds through the stone corridors like a bell that no longer exists. A call, perhaps, or a warning. In the deepest underground of the Vatican Library, there is a peculiar object of which very few outside the ecclesiastical elite have ever heard. It is not a book, nor a scroll, nor a liturgical artifact. It is a small iron-clad chest with no lock or key. The chest is ancient, much older than the Vatican itself, yet its surface is smooth, immune to the passage of time. The story begins in 1570, when the chest was delivered to Rome under the escort of Jesuit messengers. According to notes in their diaries, it came from the Ethiopian highlands, carried on foot across arid deserts and mountain ranges. The priests who brought it were pale and shocked and refused to stay in the city more than a day. Their last words were transcribed by a Vatican scribe, who reported that one of them said, "We have been ordered that it belongs here, and that it must never be opened." What prompted the Vatican to accept such an enigmatic object? This remains unclear, but for centuries the chest was guarded behind layers of armoured rooms and watched archives. It is believed that only 3 popes have seen it directly. Each of them took an oath of eternal silence. Then, in the spring of 1958, something unusual happened. A slight seismic tremor shook some areas of Vatican City. It was quick and harmless, causing no damage to the basilicas or main buildings. But in the underground depths, in the archive chamber where the chest lay, guards reported hearing a loud, metallic sound. When the chest was examined the next morning, its position had shifted slightly. Even more worrying, however, was the discovery beneath it. A circle of black ash imprinted on the stone floor. The Vatican immediately sealed the chamber and the news never reached the public, but a retired priest, Don Angelo D'Amico, who had once served in the archive, spoke of it decades later. In a conversation, over the years, however, her premonitions became more unsettling. She spoke of earthquakes, fires, and even the sudden death of a visiting bishop, an event that occurred exactly 3 days after her prediction. Intrigued and alarmed, the Church brought her to the Vatican, entrusting her to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. They assigned her a small room behind the Apostolic Palace. The authorities claimed it was to protect her, but Isabella noted in her diary that it felt more like a prison. Every day, priests visited her, not to console her, but to interrogate her. They wanted to know what she saw, what voices she perceived. They examined her minutely, studied her. They even called in a brain specialist to analyse her. And yet, the premonitions persisted. Then something changed. In early 1972, Isabella confided to her guardian that she had seen a red door in the depths of the Vatican. Beyond that threshold opened a chamber full of light, more dazzling than the sun itself, and inside was something that breathed without needing air. She claimed it was not evil, just ancient. She called it the Guardian. That was the last meaningful conversation anyone had with her. 2 days later, she disappeared. Her room was locked from the inside. Her diary had vanished. The only clue left was a single snow-white feather resting on her pillow. The Vatican never communicated her disappearance. Among the whispers, some murmured that she had been moved to a monastery. Others thought she had ventured into the hidden catacombs, never to return. But a retired Swiss guard, who spoke anonymously years later, swore he saw her descending a staircase behind the Sistine Chapel. She did not walk normally, he recounted. She levitated with her eyes wide open but completely still. Her name was erased from the church's records in 30 days. But there is an unexpected twist. In 2006, a group of workers installing electrical wiring in the Vatican Library discovered a sealed chamber behind a false wall. Inside was a chair, a desk, and a diary. The last written phrase read, "It watches without moving, waits in the light." And beneath those words lay a feather, now aged and grey. The Vatican resealed the chamber, and no one mentioned Sister Isabella anymore. But sometimes, at night, a light can be glimpsed shining faintly through the cracks of that wall, not flickering like a flame, but steady, like two eyes that never close. In the quiet corridors of the Vatican Apostolic Archive, there once served a man known simply as Father Matteo. His task was to catalogue ancient texts, many of which had remained untouched for centuries. The Vatican Archive, filled with mysteries, represented the ideal place for a man who preferred volumes to human relationships. Father Matteo arrived at the Vatican in 1986. He spoke softly, wore thick glasses, and never missed morning prayers. But behind his calm appearance burned an insatiable curiosity. While others diligently catalogued manuscripts without questioning, Matteo often stayed late, delving deeper than necessary. One night, as the bells of St. Peter's Basilica chimed softly, Matteo discovered an unlabelled box, hidden behind a row of dusty shelves, as if someone had tried to forget it. Inside he found a parchment scroll wrapped in black cloth. The writing on the scroll was Latin, but the words seemed to shift as he read them, as if they resisted comprehension. He transcribed a passage into his notebook. It spoke of a mirror that shows not your face, but your essence. There was no indication of where the mirror was kept, only that it was under the eye of the lion. That night, Father Matteo dreamed of a stone lion watching him from the wall above a staircase he had never noticed before. In the dream, the lion opened and closed its eyes. When Matteo awoke, he could still hear the sound of stone scraping against stone. The next day, driven by the dream vision, Matteo began searching for that staircase. Weeks passed without result. Then, one afternoon, he stopped under the sculpture of a lion in the eastern wing of the archive. Its eyes seemed excessively detailed, too watchful. He gently pressed the lion's paw. The adjacent wall creaked and moved, revealing a narrow passage that descended into absolute darkness. Matteo, armed only with a flashlight, followed the stone steps. They spiraled down into the underground depths where the air became cold and stale. At the bottom, he discovered a circular room, empty except for a tall mirror standing upright. Its surface gleamed like water. He approached and did not see his own face, but his childhood home, then his mother's gaze, and finally a flash of flames. Terrified, he turned to leave, but the passage behind him had closed. For 48 hours, Vatican officials searched for him. His notebook was found open on the desk with the phrase, "The mirror sees everything," repeated obsessively. When they finally opened the lion's staircase, the room was deserted. The mirror had disappeared. Father Matteo was never recovered, but even today some archivists whisper that if you pass near the East Wing at night, you can hear a voice faintly resonating among the shelves reciting prayers in Latin, a voice resembling Matteo's still searching for the way back. That morning the sky over Vatican City was an endless grey that cast a cool stillness over the cobblestones. The bells of St. Peter's Basilica had not yet chimed, though the hour was near. In the depths of the Apostolic Palace, in the hidden corridors few traversed, Cardinal Bellari and Sister Mara returned from the chamber, transformed in ways they could not yet discuss. Neither spoke a word. The silence between them weighed more than any prayer. Above, inside the papal apartments, Pope Lucio stood before a tall window, hands clasped behind his back. He had sensed something change, not in the earth beneath him, but in the atmosphere, in the spirit, in the weight of the centuries that fell upon him. He had not spoken to Bellari for weeks, since the cardinal had begun investigating the ancient sect known as Custodes Sumbrae. But now he understood. Something had been opened. Back in the library, Bellari sealed the fragile parchment in a steel drawer and placed his hand on the wooden key Sister Amara had given him. It burned faintly against his skin. It was not red-hot. It was not painful, but conscious. It watched. He did not dare to store it in a safe, nor to leave it in plain sight. Instead, he carried it under his cassock, pressed against his chest, as if the key itself needed protection. That night a letter arrived. It was written on paper so old, the ink had begun to seep into the fibres. There was no return address, only a symbol, a circle of stars surrounding a single eye. The seal of the Arcana Domini, the secret council said to operate even beyond the Pope's authority. The letter contained a single line: "You have broken the silence, now it begins." Bellari felt the walls sway. It was believed that the Arcana Domini were extinct, dissolved, after the Great Purge of 1711, when half of their members were accused of heresy and erased from all records. But this letter, this threat or summons, proved otherwise. Sister Mara read the message twice, with a tense expression. She recounted an ancient story passed down through whispers from generation to generation. A prophecy about a room that did not guard a treasure, but a memory. A memory capable of thinking for itself, a memory forged by the faith and fear of every soul that had crossed the Vatican's walls. And now they had awakened it. That night, the great bells of St. Peter's Basilica suddenly rang, though no one had touched them. The city stirred. The guards looked up at the tower, then at each other. No one spoke. Much further below, in the now resealed silent chamber, something moved, not loudly, not violently, just enough to let the silence know it was no longer alone. The rain drummed softly against the windows of the Vatican archives, while the wind blew through the narrow corridors. Cardinal Bellari sat at a massive oak desk, the letter from the Arcana Domini still clutched in his fingers. Sister Mara stood beside him, watching the candlelight dance in the room. The Vatican no longer seemed a place of peace. It seemed a mystery wrapped in ancient stone. Bellari finally broke the silence. He said the Arcana Domini would not have sent any warning unless something much worse had happened. Amara asked what they should do. Bellari looked at her quietly. He said they would go to the necropolis. Amara was startled. That word had not left her lips since she was a child. The necropolis, the city of the dead beneath the Vatican, was not an ordinary cemetery. It was a forbidden realm, filled with tombs predating Christianity, tunnels swallowed by time, and whispers that, according to some, came. The candlelight flickered on Sister Amara's face as she held the glowing page in her trembling hands. The words written on the parchment pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, and the air in the room now felt heavier. Cardinal Bellari moved closer to her. His voice was barely a whisper. "What does it say?" She opened her mouth to reply, but found herself unable to speak. Not because she didn't understand Latin, but because something inside her had changed. The words weren't just written language. They were memories. Not memories from her own life, but memories that belonged to no one in particular. They were visions of the Church's future, written long before she was born. The Vatican's most dangerous secret had never been a place or an object. It had always been a prophecy. As Amara looked up, the walls of the room began to vibrate. A faint hum filled the air, and the black books around them began to move on the shelves as if pulled by an invisible force. A book fell and landed open on the floor. Bellari bent to pick it up and gasped. "It's a list," he said. "Names. Hundreds." He flipped through the pages quickly. Each name was followed by a date and a short phrase. Eliminated. Silenced. Reassigned. The last entries were blank. Then he saw another name. Sister Amara. Her name was the last entry, written in red ink, and next to it the word activated. Bellari looked at her, pale and stunned. "They planned it. They trained you not just to keep the secrets, but to become the key to them." Suddenly, a muffled roar shook the room. The walls behind them closed in, sealing them off. But Amara remained calm. Her eyes shone with certainty. For the first time, she understood who she really was. Not just a nun, not just a daughter of the Vatican's shadows, but the voice of the truth the Church had tried to bury. Bellari grabbed her arm. "We have to go. If the others find out..." She gently pulled away from his arm. "They already know." From hidden speakers, the voice of Father Matteo resonated, though this time it was not a recording. "You have awakened the last light of the archive," he said. "Now, Sister Amara, you must decide whether to keep the truth hidden or reveal it." She looked at the golden box, now closed again. Then she looked back at the page in her hand. Her voice was firm. "The truth belongs to everyone." And as she uttered these words, the Vatican began to tremble. Not from violence, but from the weight of centuries of secrets finally unveiled. The silence that followed Amara's decision did not last long. Somewhere above them bells began to ring, but this time it was not for a mass or a funeral. The sound was strange, irregular, almost as if the bells themselves were confused. Bellari remained motionless, his fingers still clutching the edge of the open black book, the pages fluttering frantically, as if driven by a wind that came from nowhere. On the surface, deep in the Vatican gardens, a marble slab cracked. The earth yielded slightly, revealing a faint amber glow that slowly spread. An aroma of ancient rock mixed with spent fuel hung in the air, a fragrance that had been trapped for more than 4 centuries without ever reaching the outside. In St. Peter's Square, visitors looked up, confused by a dull roar coming from underground. Without any warning, the Basilica's lighting completely flickered out. Inside that room, the atmosphere again changed abruptly. The wall that had enclosed them began to dissolve, not because of the elevated temperature, but simply from the passage of time. The rock vanished like a sheet of paper left in water too long. On the other side were 3 figures dressed in intense crimson. Their faces remained hidden under deep, dark hoods. One of those figures advanced cautiously and slowly uncovered his head. It was the librarian, or rather the one Amara had always considered a simple guardian of ancient manuscripts. Now she perceived him in a completely different light. His gaze was not merely aged, it was consumed, like one who had waited for entire ages for the arrival of something or someone in particular. "It was not yet time for you to find out," he uttered softly. And yet you found out anyway. Bellari slowly lowered his eyelids. So everything was orchestrated beforehand. The librarian nodded with evident weariness. Orchestrated, certainly, but never mastered from the beginning. We merely observed events. We never intervened directly. Until this precise moment, Amara took a decisive step forward. Then stop looking beyond everything. You have guarded the prediction locked in this safe place, protected by elaborate lies, hidden among tales of the night and half-truths. No more from this moment on. The librarian's lips visibly tightened. Do you truly understand what would happen if humanity saw what is written? Amara showed no hesitation. They will make their choice personally. Behind her, the golden container that had been sealed through blood and religious devotion began to open spontaneously. The parchment kept inside delicately rose into the surrounding atmosphere. Luminous symbols emerged from it like small sparks, spinning through space, brushing against every available wall. They danced on the vertical surfaces and spilled into the underground passages. In the papal archive, ancient parchments suddenly caught fire. Not true flames, but pure, intense luminosity. Volumes sealed by decree of deceased pontiffs now whispered aloud their forbidden contents. Names that had been erased returned to light, glowing with ghostly ink on the walls of the famous Sistine Chapel. Outside, a little girl looked at the sky and asked her mother why the sun had taken on an unusual golden hue. Back in the room, the librarian stepped aside. Well, it's definitely done now. Amara took a deep breath, calm and filled with something completely new, renewed hope. The golden luminosity spread faster than anyone could mentally conceive. On the ancient stone walls of the Vatican complex, precise words, forgotten names, buried dates, hidden confessions began to materialize. They were not traced by human hand, but shone in the air like reminiscences taking tangible form. Some observers, seeing them manifest, fell to their trembling knees. Others turned sharply, terrified of what the revelation of the truth might personally cost them. Amara entered the passage, followed closely by both Bellari and the silent librarian. Behind their group, the Chamber of Mysteries was now completely empty. The ancient parchment had completely dissolved into pure light, its power finally released into the world. Whispers pursued them through the dark, damp corridors, not from physical people, but from the walls themselves. It seemed the Vatican was finally expressing itself freely, its very long silence broken by entire centuries of secrets finally brought to light. In a quiet, secluded room, where once supreme pontiffs wrote letters that only the Almighty should read, a letter spontaneously appeared on the antique desk. It was not placed by mortal hand, but by the pure force of emerging truth. The hot wax seal completely melted, revealing words written in a voice no one remembered anymore, but which everyone instinctively deeply feared. It dated back to 1962. It spoke clearly of a vision buried under the main basilica, a vision of devastating fire and tearing division, a warning deliberately ignored. Bellari reached out to grasp the mysterious letter, but it instantly turned to fine ash before he could even decipher the last concluding line. "Do you still truly believe we can control this explosive situation?" he asked urgently. The librarian's eyes now seemed even dimmer than before. "We never could have controlled it." That was the first lie ever told. Outside, the lights flickered erratically. The obsidian floor trembled beneath their feet. Something powerful was approaching fast. Bellari cursed under his breath, furious. "You brought us here to watch over a bomb about to explode." "It's not a real bomb," Lucian said calmly. "It's the naked truth. A truth that takes the form of collective memory, and the truth can never be completely destroyed, only hidden for a time. The librarian fell to his knees, exhausted. If that vault is ever fully opened, devastating wars will break out. Entire nations will fall into ruin. They will blame the Vatican. They will blame faith itself. Amara stood still, deep in thought. Her mind raced frantically, never resting. So what exactly should we do? Let the world forget everything again? Lucien approached her cautiously, his voice low and measured. No. Tell the whole story, but tell it slowly and gradually, one controlled piece at a time, like a special bedtime storm story, one that keeps people awake and alert. Suddenly, the glass door shattered violently, fire spilling rapidly into the room, not hot and scorching, but intensely bright, like the light of 1,000 burning candles. The visions around them turned to fine ash, and in the ash, new words began to form spontaneously. Forgotten names, precise dates, hidden confessions, secrets inscribed in the very bones of history. Lucien emerged, unafraid. The Vatican can no longer hide effectively, but it can be completely reborn. Behind him, the fire touched the cold floor and rose like a royal crown. Bellari reached out desperately to Amara, but she was already moving with determination, not to flee, but to read carefully, to see clearly, to remember everything. The light from the shattered glass faded slowly into the air, but what remained was not smoke or material ruins. It was a deep silence, a silence so dense and heavy it pressed against their skin. Amara moved forward, determined, through the shining golden ash, toward the burning circle of names engraved in the ancient marble. They glowed without real flame, without perceptible heat, as if memory itself had caught spiritual fire. Bellari followed closely, steadying himself with a hand on the wall. "Do you feel it too?" he whispered, worried. Amara stopped abruptly. "Feel what?" He listened intently to the atmosphere. Nothing at all, not even the familiar bells. The bells of St. Peter's Basilica had stopped completely. For the first time in over 400 years, the Vatican was without its vital heartbeat. Lucien stood motionless behind them, eyes closed, lips moving in absolute silence. The librarian lingered near a half-collapsed bookshelf, breathing heavily and gasping. "It's starting right now," he panted. "The forgotten prophecy of 1939, the silence before the final reckoning." Amara turned sharply, alarmed. "What prophecy exactly?" The librarian stared at her, tormented. "When the bells fall silent for good, the vault of buried voices will open." That's what was clearly written in the margin of a letter buried beneath the tomb of Pope Pius XV. A bedtime story for the brave or the recklessly mad. Amara knelt beside the mysterious burning circle. One name shone brighter than the rest. Her own, Amara Lyone. Her hand trembled as she reached for it, but Lucien shouted loudly, "Wait a moment!" She stopped completely. "It's not just any name, it's a true key. The Vatican doesn't just passively keep secrets, it actively creates them. You were chosen the moment you were born." Bellari approached, confused. "What are you saying exactly?" Lucien's voice dropped dramatically. "Amara was born on Vatican soil itself in absolute secrecy. Her mother was a scribe in the reserved apostolic archive. Her father was completely erased from the official records. She was meant to replace something they had lost forever." Amara held her breath, anguished. "Replace what exactly?" "The long-lost heiress," Lucien whispered mysteriously. "To the shadow papacy, an alternate line of succession hidden for centuries. Not of official popes, but of secret watchers." The ground beneath them shook violently again. The fire moved toward the exact centre, forming a perfect spiral. From that spiral, a platform of ancient stone rose. Upon it rested a single precious object, a particular crown. Simple in form, made of iron and centuries old. The librarian bowed his head respectfully. The legendary iron mitre. Bellari's face turned completely white. This is an ancient myth. No, not at all, Amara whispered with certainty. It's my personal inheritance. When her fingers brushed the edge of the sacred platform, the crown pulsed once, then stopped completely. Lucian smiled faintly, sadly. Now you finally understand. It was never about past history. It was about real power. The Vatican has always known the greatest secret of all. That memory shapes deep faith, and faith shapes the entire world. Behind them, the bells began to ring again, one note at a time, a slow and steadily growing melody. The Vatican was finally awakening, and so was Amara. The crown remained in perfect silence, almost completely still, as if it had held its breath for a long time. Amara stood motionless before it, her fingers still hovering over the ancient iron mitre. Behind her, the bells of St. Peter's Basilica rang louder and louder. Each chime seemed like a question without a clear answer. Bellari looked pale and tired, as if the sound of those bells was evoking something he had long buried in his memory. "You don't have to put it on," he said kindly and understandingly, approaching her slowly. "You can always walk away." Amara didn't move an inch. "I don't think I honestly can." Lucian stood rigid, hands behind his back, watching everything like a complex chessboard he had prepared his whole life. She was chosen before she even knew how to crawl on the floor. The Vatican has secrets within hidden secrets. But this could completely remake the church. Amara picked up the crown decisively. It felt heavier than iron itself, heavier than anything she had ever held before. When it touched her delicate skin, the ground beneath her shook sharply again, but this time something opened for good. Behind the altar, a door appeared that hadn't been there before. Its frame was of ancient, sturdy wood. Older than the Vatican itself, surely. Carved into it were mysterious symbols that no one had spoken aloud for over 1,000 years. Lucian started visibly, surprised. "That's the Door of Echoes," he said reverently. "It was sealed during the Black Smoke Conclave of 1912, mysterious. It's said that beyond that door lies the most dangerous truth in all the Vatican." Bellari stopped in front of Amara, protective. "We don't know what's in there exactly. What if this is the final deadly trap?" Amara looked down at the heavy crown, then up at the mysterious door. Oh, the ultimate test! Before they could physically stop her, she bravely stepped forward and solemnly placed the crown on her head. The door responded immediately, opening without a sound. Inside, the air was completely different, heavy and dense, warm and oppressive, filled with a strange, pulsing energy. Torches lit up as she entered, casting shadows that danced on the cold stone walls. In the centre of the room was a massive table. On it lay a single ancient book, the Forbidden Book of Silences. Lucian's voice broke with emotion. "No one has seen it since 1983 exactly. It contains the names of all the Vatican watchers, living and dead to this day." Amara reached out with a trembling hand and carefully opened the book. There were thousands of names listed, but on the last page was something unexpected and surprising. A detailed drawing. A girl with her identical face. Below, a name written clearly. Amara, bearer of light of the final hour. Bellari whispered in disbelief. What does it mean exactly? Lucian stepped forward, slowly and solemnly. "It means she's not here to protect the old secrets. She's here to end." Before he could reply, the bells of the Basilica began to ring, but not in their usual rhythm. Each chime sent ripples through the pavement. With every vibration, words appeared, etched by invisible hands. The words were names, thousands. Lucian recognized one immediately. "Bellari," he said, tracing its outline with his finger. The girl nodded. "All those who have always defended the truth, and all those who have died for it." The girl nodded again. Lucian turned to her, his voice trembling. "Why show me this?" "Because the bedtime story was not for you," she said gently. "It was for the world, but the world has forgotten how to listen." A gust of wind lifted and scattered the pages of the book. One landed at Lucien's feet. He bent down to read it. It was not a story, but a confession signed by a pope from centuries ago. A secret that, if spoken aloud, could change everything. The girl stared at him. "So, what will you do now?" Lucien closed his eyelids, ready to decide. The wind brought a soft hum to St. Peter's Square as Lucien opened his eyes again. He was still kneeling. The girl had vanished, the paper still in his hand. It glowed faintly. He rose slowly, his heart pounding as loudly as the bells had moments before. The Vatican was no longer frozen in silence. Life had returned, but it was not the same. The statues moved, not gracefully, but with jerks and tremors, as if something was awakening after centuries of sleep. Their stone eyes blinked. One of them, the closest to the obelisk, turned its head toward Lucien. The face resembled his grandfather's. Lucien stepped back. "You were never meant to see this," said the statue. Its voice was deep and resonated as if coming from underground. "I did not come to ask permission," Lucien replied, clutching the page. The statue's mouth curved into a slow, sad smile. "And that is why the Vatican cannot hold you." As it spoke the word Vatican, the basilica behind him began to move. The columns twisted as if they were made of rope. The dome cracked slightly at the top, revealing a dark space behind it. It was not a sky, but a memory. In that space, Lucien saw something impossible. He saw his mother, dressed in the white habit of a nun, sitting beside an ancient pope in a candle-lit room. She was reading the Book of Silences. Lucien's knees buckled. "My mother was involved in all this." "She was the last protector," said the statue, "and she chose to hide the truth within you." Suddenly, the page he was clutching grew warm. The letters rose, forming symbols that floated in the sky and arranged themselves in a perfect circle above his head. The circle shone brighter than the moon. A door. Lucien turned toward the basilica. Now there were people, not tourists, but figures in robes. Dozens of them, each with faces blurred like unfinished paintings. One stepped forward. His voice was familiar. "Lucien," he said, "the time has come." The man was Father Thomas, the priest who had helped raise him after his mother's death. But his eyes were no longer kind. They were frightened. "Do not open that door." Lucien stood still. "You think the Vatican is a place," Thomas said. "It is not. It is a narrative, a story that must be told carefully, slowly, or else it collapses." Lucien looked at the glowing circle above him. "If stories are never fully told," he said, "they are not stories, they are prisons." He stepped forward, and then the circle descended, enveloping him in light and lifting him from the square. At that moment, all the clocks in the city stopped, and somewhere, deep in the archives, a locked chest opened. The bedtime story was no longer a story, it was reality, and it had just begun. Lucien did not land in a place, but in a time. The light around him faded, and he found himself standing inside what seemed to be the original Sistine Chapel. Not as it appears today, but as it might have looked in its early years, when Michelangelo's painting was still drying, and whispers floated through the halls like prayers. But it was not deserted. Figures moved in the space, not tourists or priests, but scholars and cardinals in ancient robes. The year, he realized, must be around 1513. He stepped back as a man passed by, holding a large bound book wrapped in a red cloth, the Book of Silences. Again, it manifested itself to him as if waiting to be understood. Lucian followed the man in silence, his steps quiet. The Vatican was alive in a way he had never perceived before. The mysteries were not hidden there, they were being written. They turned a corner and entered a room full of scrolls. In the centre stood a tall, hooded man facing away. The scholar with the book bowed deeply and handed it over. The hooded figure spoke. "It is not safe yet," he said. "The others do not understand what it contains." The scholar hesitated. "Should we lock it away in the archives?" "No," said the hooded man. "We will lock it beneath the city." Lucian stopped. "Beneath the city?" asked the scholar. "Beneath which city? Not this one," said the hooded man. "The one in the future." Suddenly, the hooded man turned toward Lucien. He should not have seen him. He should not have known he was there, but he did, and the face beneath the hood was Lucien's own. Lucien staggered back, his heart pounding in his chest. The air shifted, the walls trembled, the chapel shook, the scene faded. He was falling again. When he landed, he found himself in a dimly lit stone chamber. The walls were lined with shelves full of keys, thousands of keys. A single candle flickered at the far end, where a monk stood in silence. Lucien approached him. "Did you see it?" said the monk without turning. "Did you see what was hidden? Was it really me?" asked Lucien. The monk nodded. "You are both the seeker and the one who hid it. How is that possible?" The monk turned slowly, and Lucien held his breath. It was the same girl from St. Peter's Square, with bright, ancient eyes. But this time she was dressed as a monk. She handed him a small black iron key. "Why does time bend for stories?" she said, placing it in his hand. "Especially those that are not yet finished." Lucian looked at the key. There was a single word engraved: Vaticana. His fingers closed around the key as the bells rang above him again. It was not over yet, not by far. The mysteries of the Vatican were just beginning to whisper, and this bedtime story was not for sleeping, but for awakening. The candle light flickered against the stone walls as Lucien stood still with the iron key in his hand. His heart beat louder than the bells ringing above him. He was no longer just a historian searching for shadows. He was part of the narrative, a story written across centuries and buried in the very bones of the Vatican itself. The girl, still dressed in the monk's habit, walked past him toward a sealed archway at the back of the room. She pressed her palm against the wall. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a shape emerged. A perfect lock, the size of the iron key now warming in Lucian's hand. She looked at him with a kind of melancholy. "Once you open this, you will never be able to stop seeing what lies behind." Lucien swallowed. "I have already seen my face in the past." She nodded. "And you still do not know who you are." He stepped forward, heart pounding, and inserted the key into the lock. It turned without resistance. The wall split in two, and it opened onto a narrow corridor, lit by torches that should have burned out centuries ago. The air was cold, but smelled of parchment and time. They walked together in silence. The corridor spiraled downward. With each step, Lucian felt memories pushing their way inside him. Not his own, but ancient ones. Whispers echoed in his ears. Names, prayers, confessions. One voice rose above the rest. It was his mother's. "Lucian," said the voice gently. "You were born for this." His knees nearly gave way. "How could she have known?" he whispered. The girl stopped. "Because she was one of us." Lucien's mind spun. "One of who? The Custodes Veritas?" Lucien's footsteps echoed in the darkness. Each step took him deeper and deeper into the bowels of the Vatican. The young woman followed closely, holding a dim lantern. The air was cold, dense and still. Somewhere far above, the world continued on, unaware that the most powerful secret in Vatican history was awakening after centuries of silence. Lucienne stopped when the staircase ended at a simple wooden door. It looked like it belonged in a country house, not in the depths of an ancient crypt. He touched it gently. It opened with a faint creak. Beyond the door stretched a room unlike anything they had seen before. The walls were covered in mirrors, and in the centre stood a single stone pedestal with a silver box on top. The mirrors reflected Lucian and the young woman from every angle, but something was off. In one of the reflections, Lucian was missing. He approached, his heart pounding. The silver box had no locks or latches, only an inscription on the lid, written in Latin. The young woman translated softly. Only the forgotten can reveal what was never remembered. Lucian didn't understand. What does it mean? It means we must stop trying to remember the past, she explained. We must forget who we are. Only then can we see what was hidden. Before he could answer, one of the mirrors cracked. A thin line spread across the glass like a spider web, then another shattered, and another. In each reflection, Lucien's image slowly faded, as if erased by time. Suddenly, the box sprang open, the lid lifted by itself. Inside was not a relic or a scroll. It was a simple, folded piece of beige, dusty cloth. Lucian picked it up carefully. As he unfolded it, a cloud of ancient dust rose into the air, and the cloth revealed a single word stitched in red thread. Eden. Lucian looked at the young woman. What does it mean? Before she could answer, the room began to tremble. The mirrors shattered all at once, and behind the glass they found walls covered in carvings. A garden, a tree, a man and a woman, and a faceless angel. This is older than the church, the young woman whispered. Is it older than the Vatican? Older than the stories? Lucian stepped back. His voice was barely a breath. This is no longer a bedtime story. Then the walls shifted again, revealing a tunnel carved into the rock. From its depths came the sound of running water and a heartbeat. Not Lucien's, nor the young woman's. Something else was awakening, something waiting to be discovered. The tunnel smelled of damp stone and memories. Lucian clutched the cloth with the word Eden tightly in his hands, not knowing if he was protecting it or calling something closer. The young woman walked beside him, her face pale but calm. The lantern cast shadows on the rough walls. Behind them, the hall of mirrors was left in complete silence, as if it had vanished from the world the moment they left. The deeper they went, the more the air changed. Now it was warmer, but dense, like the air before a storm. Then he heard the sound again. A heartbeat, slow and steady, echoed in the tunnel walls, and seemed to synchronize with Lucien's, until he realized it wasn't beating inside him at all. "I think it's alive," said the young woman. "What?" She pointed ahead. The tunnel opened into a circular chamber, entirely of black marble. No crosses, no saints, no Vatican symbols. In the centre lay a pool of water, and the water gave off a faint glow, as if moonlight had been poured into it. Floating just above was something Lucian couldn't decipher. It looked like a crown, but it was made of roots and branches, not gold or jewels. It pulsed with the same heartbeat, as if it were breathing. Lucian stepped forward, drawn involuntarily. Then he saw it. Reflected in the water was not his face, but that of a child with his eyes, but older than time itself. The reflection stared at him, then whispered in a voice only he could hear. "You have been here before." Lucien stepped back. "That's not possible." The young woman turned to him. "Do you remember now?" He shook his head, but his hands trembled. "What is this place?" He looked slowly around the room. "This is where it all began. Not just the church, not just the Vatican, everything. Lucian stared at the glowing water. He felt the cloth in his hands grow warm. The word Eden glowed faintly, as if the stitches were lit from within. What do we do? The young woman looked at him with sad eyes. We decide whether to wake it or not. Then the roots moved. The crown spun in the air as if it had sensed them. The heartbeat quickened, intensifying. A wall behind the pool opened silently, and beyond there were no treasures, no flames, no bones. It was a staircase made of light that led upward, not down. Lucian looked at the young woman. If we go up, do we go back? No, she replied, not as we were. Lucian thought of everything they'd discovered. The secrets, the lies, the bedtime stories that should never have been told. And then he took her hand. Together they stepped into the light. The staircase of light didn't feel like stone or wood. It was soft under Lucian's feet, like walking on something that remembered dreams. The young woman squeezed his hand tighter as they climbed. Each step glowed brighter behind them and darker ahead. The Vatican had always kept its secrets, but this was different. It seemed they had been hidden even from the guardians themselves. When they reached the top, they found themselves in a small room. The walls were smooth and white, engraved with strange symbols that glowed at a touch. In the centre lay an old wooden lectern upon which rested a single book. No title, no markings on the spine, but when Lucian touched it, it opened as if it had been waiting for him. The pages were filled with languages he didn't know, but somehow understood. The words were alive, shifting, rewriting themselves, speaking of the Vatican, but not the one the world knew. This was the Vatican before the Vatican, a place of pure memory, a city of silence, and it had not always been ruled by men. Lucian looked up and saw a reflection forming in the curved ceiling above them. It showed a man dressed in papal robes, but his eyes were completely black, with no whites, no pupils. The man raised a hand, and the room turned icy cold. "That's not the Pope," the young woman said quietly. Lucian felt the same sensation. That figure wore the symbols of the church, but not its peace. The image moved, whispering in a voice that scraped like wind over stone. "You are not the first to find this place, but you might be the last." Lucienne approached the book. "What is this? What should we do?" The voice whispered again. "Tell the story, before it is erased again." And then, behind them, the door vanished. It didn't close. It didn't hide. It disappeared. They were sealed inside. The young woman approached the wall and placed her palm on one of the symbols. Light flowed from her hand into the stone, and a new image appeared. It was St. Peter's Square, full of people, but they were not tourists or pilgrims. They were watchers, silent, motionless. Each wore masks shaped like keys. Lucienne held his breath. "What are they waiting for?" The young woman looked at him and said, "For you." Lucienne looked back at the book, which now burned slightly at the edges. Only one page remained. Above it, a mirror, and in that mirror, his face. But it was older, wiser, and crowned with vine branches. In the end, he understood. This was not the conclusion of the mystery. It was the beginning of a story that had to be told. A bedtime story for the world. A story that would shake the Vatican and perhaps finally awaken the truth. The mirror in the book shone as it was a memory. It was every hidden truth, every buried name, every bedtime story turned into myth. The young woman stepped forward, staring into the void. "This is where the secrets were kept." The man nodded. "No, this is where they were born." Lucian closed the book. The glow vanished instantly, plunging them into stillness. He pressed it to his chest and turned to the cardinal. "This is no longer your story," Lucian said. The old man slowly shook his head. It never was. Without warning, the room was lit by a final flash of light, and then the room was no longer a room. The Basilica had disappeared. Instead, they found themselves in a library stretching in every direction, filled with books written in a language they had never seen. Yet, Lucienne could understand every title, and so could the young woman. The man faded away like mist under the morning sun, leaving only his voice. Every secret of the Vatican lives in this place, every truth the world was not ready for. But now the question is not whether the story ends. The question is who dares to tell it. Lucian took the young woman's hand. Together they walked to the nearest shelf. The bedtime story had lasted centuries, but now the children were awake. The books on the shelves had no spines or pages. They were not made of paper or leather, but of light. When Lucian reached out, his fingers passed through one like mist, but the instant he touched it, the story unfolded, not in words, but in memory. He saw a boy in 1943 running through the narrow tunnels of the Vatican with a scroll hidden under his coat. A priest chased him, shouting in Latin, but the boy never stopped. That scroll, Lucienne realized, contained a name erased from all history books. A woman once believed to be the first to translate the Code of Origins, who vanished without a trace. The vision faded, and the young woman beside him gasped. "You saw it too." Lucian nodded. "They're not just books, they're truths." Each story revealed what the Vatican had hidden, ancient symbols that could control thought, a secret council that once decided which Gospels would survive and which would disappear. Hidden rooms beneath St. Peter's Square, built centuries before the church itself. Suddenly, the floor beneath them shifted and the light dimmed. A shadow moved in the corner of the library. It was not a person, but a memory too strong to be forgotten, too angry to rest. It took the form of the cardinal. His face was the same, but older, worn, tired. He was the last guardian of the hidden archive, not by choice, but by punishment. "You have opened the door," he said. "Now the stories will consume you." Lucian stepped forward. Why were they hidden? "Because the truth was never safe," the cardinal replied, "and children were never allowed to read bedtime stories that could start wars." The young woman, calm but determined, pointed to one of the books glowing red. "This one seems unfinished." Lucienne touched it. A new vision blossomed. This time it was his mother. She stood at a podium in 1983, arguing with the Council for the Restitution of Lost Archives. She pleaded for history to be told honestly, but they silenced her. Lucien felt a lump in his throat. She tried to tell the world. The cardinal nodded slowly, and she paid the price. Lucien turned to the shelf, his eyes burning. "Then we will finish her story." Suddenly, the light around the red book flared. The walls of the library opened, revealing a secret spiral staircase. The young woman smiled. "It seems the story wants to be told." They climbed, not knowing where it would lead, but with one thing in mind. The bedtime story was no longer a whisper in the dark. It had become a voice ready to be heard, and this time the world would listen. The staircase was narrow and steep, carved from stone that had not seen light in centuries. Lucien ran his hand along the wall as he climbed, feeling the grooves left by others who had walked the same path long before. The young woman followed close behind, her torch casting long shadows that danced like ghosts on the walls. With each step, the air grew warmer, denser, as if the past itself was pressing down on them. When they reached the top, they found themselves in a small room, no bigger than a monk's cell. A single window looked out over St. Peter's Square, but from a height and angle Lucien had never seen before. It was a hidden lookout above the Vatican, above everything, and in the centre of the room was a pedestal with an open book. Unlike those below, this book was real, bound in worn velvet, its pages yellowed with age. Lucien stepped forward. The writing was in Latin, but not ecclesiastical Latin. It was older, rougher, almost as if it had been spoken before it was written. The young woman peered over his shoulder, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you know what it says?" He nodded. "It's a prophecy." A loud crash echoed from below. The staircase they had just climbed was collapsing. Dust poured through the hole behind them. They were trapped. The young woman did not panic. Instead, she pointed to the book. Then we read it. Every word. Lucienne began to translate aloud. The words spoke of a hidden heir to a forgotten order, one who would one day return not to rule but to reveal, not to guide but to unlock. The heir would be marked by silence and fire, and would be guided by dreams that felt like memories. His voice slowed. He looked up. They weren't visions, they were memories. Mine. The young woman's eyes widened. "Do you think you're the heir?" "No," he said. "I know." Before she could answer, a sharp sound rang out in the small room, like glass breaking. The window behind them cracked. The Vatican guards had found them. Outside, figures in black robes moved across the rooftops. Lucienne recognized one. It was the same man who had chased them through the archives, only now he held a torch and was smiling. "They'll burn it," Lucienne said. "Everything." The girl took the book from the pedestal. "Then we take it with us." "How?" she asked. He looked up at the ancient opening. "There's always an alternative, especially when reality tries to persist." Together they flung open the frame. The darkness was deep and speckled with celestial lights. Below them, St. Peter's Square waited, still and vast, like a blank page ready to be written on. Lucienne felt no fear, only clarity. The story of the night was not ending, it was just beginning. Lucienne did not hesitate for a moment, helping the young woman through. "But where does it lead?" she asked. Lucienne unrolled the parchment to the last mystery the Vatican had never wanted to reveal. As they began their descent, the light faded behind them, and though their steps were uncertain, the young woman's eyes were steady. For the first time, the bedtime story was no longer a historical tale. It was hers. The steps were narrow and steep, carved from stone that seemed older than memory itself. Each step echoed like a vital heartbeat against the ancient surfaces. The young woman led the way, her hand brushing the damp surface, while Lucienne followed closely. Far above, the chamber of mirrors had sealed, isolating them from the world they knew. Now only silence guided them. The air changed as they descended. It grew colder, but not from the absence of sunlight. It was the kind of cold that whispered of things long buried. At the bottom of the stairs, they arrived at a chamber unlike any they had seen. It was circular, without doors, without openings, just a low stone altar in the centre, and surfaces engraved with emblems of forgotten tongues. The young woman approached. "What is this place?" Lucienne's voice trembled. "This is the Chamber of Silence. It was sealed before the 1900s. Many believed it was just a myth, but myths are bedtime stories wrapped in reality," he replied almost to himself. In response, the surface in front of them quivered. It wasn't stone, as they had thought. It was a veil, a thin layer of energy that pulsed gently. The young woman reached out. When her fingers brushed the surface, it rippled and then opened, revealing a hidden chamber. Inside lay a single artifact, a cradle. But it was no ordinary cradle. It was made entirely of crystal and gold, floating a few inches above the ground. Inside lay a baby, asleep, peaceful, timeless. Lucian gasped. By the saints, the young woman could barely breathe. "Is it me?" "No," he affirmed, eyes wide. "That is the child you were meant to protect." Her mind wavered. "I don't understand." Lucienne approached the cradle, hands trembling. The Vatican created two paths. One child would live in the world, learning pain and history. The other would remain untouched, preserved. You are the key. She is the door. As soon as he finished speaking, the cradle lit up. The child inside stirred, opening her eyes. She looked at the girl and smiled. Then came the twist they didn't expect. A second door opened behind them, revealing the cardinal, alone. He hadn't stayed behind. "You weren't meant to find her," he stated coldly. "Only to lead us to her." Lucienne stepped forward. "No, you wouldn't dare." The cardinal raised a small device. "The world is not ready for the reality she holds." Before anyone could stop him, he pressed a button. The veil began to close. The chamber started to rumble. The girl ran to the cradle and touched the baby's hand. In that instant, her memories exploded, flooding her mind with visions of things hidden for centuries. History was being rewritten, and for the first time, the Vatican no longer controlled its own mysteries. The chamber was collapsing, dust falling from the ceiling as the stone groaned as if alive. The young woman held the child close to her chest, heart pounding with fear and wonder. Lucian grabbed her wrist and pulled her back as a beam creaked and fell inches from where they stood. The cradle had vanished, dissolved into light the moment the child had awakened. "You have to move," shouted Lucian. "Now." But she couldn't stop looking into the child's eyes. They were like mirrors, reflecting not just her face but a stream of images that pierced her mind. Ancient encounters beneath the Vatican, scrolls written in blood, a chamber beneath St. Peter's Square where mysteries were sealed not with locks but with oaths. The cardinal was gone. No one knew if he had fled or was buried. What mattered now was the reality unfolding in her head. The young woman realized the child was not just a mystery but a code. Every question, every enigma the Vatican had buried for centuries was within her. Staggering, they traversed a narrow passage as the surfaces behind them gave way. Lucienne pulled a hidden lever in the rock and a door opened, revealing an underground passage lit by dim blue lanterns. "This path leads to the archive," he stated with a trembling voice. "It's older than the Basilica itself." As they ran, the child spoke without thinking, repeating phrases and names in languages she had never learned. Latin, Aramaic, something even older. The child had connected her mind to something larger than memory. Suddenly, the passage opened into a crypt, towering shelves filled with scrolls, maps, and artifacts that defied logic, and at the centre of it all stood a man. He wore no vestments, no rings, no symbols of power, just a simple tunic and sandals. "I have been waiting for you," he stated. Lucian stopped dead. "It's not possible. You died in 1932. The man smiled gently. "History lies, Lucian. Death was never meant to stop what was to be remembered." The young woman stepped forward. "Who are you?" She pointed to the child in her arms. "She is the message. But you are the voice." Before she could ask anything else, the floor beneath them lit up. A map appeared. Not of paper, no ink, just light and movement. It showed catacombs, cities, names long erased from all books. The man nodded. The Vatican thought it had buried reality, but reality cannot be killed. It can only be silenced, at least until now. The chamber trembled again. Alarms began to sound, echoing from above. "They know," Lucian whispered. "They are coming." The man turned to the young woman. "Then you must choose, hide and survive, or speak and change the world." She looked at the child in her arms, then at Lucian, then at the vault surrounding her. "I choose," she stated calmly, to end the silence. The bells of St. Peter's Basilica rang out in the dark sky, but they did not ring to celebrate. They rang as a warning. Inside the archives, the young woman held the child, her breathing steady despite the chaos above her. Lucian stood at the entrance, his hand gripping an ancient staff that hadn't seen light in over 100 years. He looked at her not as a scholar, not even as a protector, but as someone who knew he was no longer the centre of the story. The man in the simple tunic approached a pedestal in the centre of the crypt. placed his hand on the surface, and the chamber pulsed with warmth. Scrolls unfurled, maps shifted, frescoes on the stone surfaces rippled like water, revealing images no human had seen in centuries. Angels with sealed mouths, keys buried beneath foundations. A woman with eyes identical to the child's. The young woman stepped forward. "It's her," she murmured. The man nodded. "And that is you." Suddenly, above them, footsteps echoed, heavy. The Vatican guard. Lucien's face paled. "They bring the seal of silence." The young woman turned, sharply. "They want to erase it all again." Lucien nodded. "They always do." The man turned to her, calm. But this time, it's too late. With a slow breath, the young woman approached the pedestal. The child in her arms did not cry. Instead, she placed a small hand on the luminous surface. A beam of light shot up from the stone, piercing the ceiling above, rising through centuries of rock and marble, reaching the heart of St. Peter's Square. Outside, the light burst from the top of the obelisk in the centre of the square. People screamed, tourists dropped their cameras, priests fell to their knees. The Vatican's greatest mystery was now a column of light stretching to the stars, impossible to ignore. Inside the vault, the chamber stopped trembling. The alarms fell silent. Lucian whispered, "What has she done?" The man smiled. She remembered above them, screens around the world began to flicker. Old archives decrypted themselves. Hidden letters appeared in open inboxes. Histories rewritten by fear were restored by the light. And far below, in the silence of the crypt, the young woman asked the question no one had dared to ask in centuries. "What happens now?" The man looked up. Now the bedtime story ends, and reality begins. As the child rested her head on the young woman's chest, one final twist was revealed. The ceiling opened, revealing not the sky, but a chamber of stars, constellations shining with names never spoken, all composed of a single word in every language known to humanity: home. Thank you for staying with us until the end. If any part of this journey made you pause and reflect, share your thoughts in the comments. We read them all. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Activate the bell so you never miss the next chapter of our story. Until then, stay curious and sleep well.